What if you woke up in another world and could create dragons? No magic, no talent, but with one secret, a system that creates legendary dragons: fire, ice, light, and darkness dragons. He goes from zero to legend by training his own dragons and facing mages, nobles, and even family betrayals. Magic Academy. But the more power he gains, the closer he gets to a dark secret. Not everything that shines is magic. From nobody to the legend of dragons. Start creating dragons today. In the Arandi Empire, in the Lanster Fief, at a school, the teacher told the children that today they would learn about mages. She said that meditation is very important, as long as a person can concentrate, and that anyone can do it. Among the children, there was a slightly older boy. He wondered if that was really true. His name was Lynn Lanster. He felt a bit down, as it had already been 8 years since he'd entered preschool. Some brats his age had already become mages capable of being independent. However, he still couldn't even meditate. He looked at his hand, saying that if he wanted to discover the truth from that year, then he needed to become a sage-level mage. Suddenly, something hit his face. The children ran to him, apologizing because they had been distracted while practicing magic and got carried away. One child asked why Lynn didn't use a shield to block. Another scolded him, asking what he was talking about. Since unfortunately their young master hadn't even graduated from preschool, how could he use any kind of magic? The child who had cast the spell looked confused, asking why, if the Lord's magic was so powerful, Lynn was still a beginner. Another child said it was because the young master was an orphan adopted by the Lord. They began talking among themselves, wondering if a nameless street boy like that was worthy of being the Lord's heir. While they talked, the protagonist began to feel extremely offended for not having graduated preschool, for being an orphan, and for being called a street boy. The children went back to playing, and Lynn thought those brats really knew how to stab a person in the heart. Suddenly, a commanding and frightening voice asked one of the boys what he was babbling about. The boy started crying and could barely explain himself. However, the protagonist asked Carl to lower his sword. The knight looked confused and glanced at the protagonist, giving the children a chance to run. Carl told the young master that he must let him punish the children severely. Lynn stood up and said that even so, Carl couldn't use that kind of method. He asked if the sword the king had granted him was meant to be used against commoners. Carl was left speechless, then bowed and apologized, saying he wouldn't do anything foolish again. The protagonist said it was fine and decided to change the subject, asking why Carl was there. The knight shouted that he had almost forgotten the reason. He said the protagonist had received a letter from Oliver and should return to check it. Lynn was surprised to hear that because Oliver was the one who helped hide his real name the year his father had an accident. He was the benefactor who hid him there. Lynn returned to the palace. He thought that Oliver knew he couldn't sense magic and had been trying to help him in every way possible. The protagonist got off the carriage happily, thinking Oliver must have discovered something this time. He entered the estate and greeted his father, saying he was back. The man turned and told Lynn to go study quickly. This man was the elder brother of the protagonist's mother. His name was Blaine Lanster. He said he had Oliver's message and would like to hear it with him. Lynn thought he should call Blaine uncle, but to avoid exposing his true identity, they had to be known to the outside world as father and adopted son. Blaine used a bit of magic, asking the little statue to read the letter. The statue's eyes began to glow and repeated exactly what was written in the letter. "Greetings, Duke Blaine. I was wandering and happened to stumble upon a peculiar magic book. Perhaps this will help Lynn awaken his magic." Suddenly, the book emerged from the small statue and flew straight into the protagonist's hands. He was surprised to see the book was made of animal bones and remarked that the material was indeed quite peculiar. However, even with the book in hand, he lowered his gaze, a bit disheartened, thinking that so many years had passed and no matter how much he tried, he couldn't awaken his true magic. This made him look at the book and wonder if this time he would succeed. Blaine, seeing this, tried to comfort him, saying that if he felt too tired, he shouldn't push himself too hard, as not everyone could be a mage, let alone a sage-level one. The Duke emphasized that if the protagonist wished, he could always live as Lynn Lanster, because it was Zoe who left him in the first place. So why should Lynn carry such a heavy burden for him and force himself to become a mage? The protagonist bowed his head and thanked his uncle for the kind words. However, he emphasized that, as his uncle already knew, his father's betrayal wasn't such a simple matter. Because before, if Lynn came home just 5 minutes late, his father would become extremely anxious and fly across the entire city looking for his son. However, now his father is trapped in the dragon territory, and unfortunately, he doesn't even know if he's alive or not. Lynn lifts his face, smiling, and says that, as a true son, he can't just ignore that. Time passes, and night falls. And that way, their family will be able to continue living happily. However, the protagonist remembers that this was the last time he saw his father because he never came back. And not only that, but his mother also vanished. So, if he wants to mend this broken family, maybe he's the only one who can do it. He wonders if that magic book can really help him awaken. He points out that the learning method recorded inside is completely different from orthodox magic. He gets out of bed, saying that whatever the result, he has already failed countless times. So what's one more failure? He begins to focus, thinking there's no harm in trying. He starts to gather his aggressive energy and draw it close to his body. However, something goes wrong and he gets frustrated and punches the wall, saying he failed again. But several orbs of energy surround him, and upon noticing them, he's surprised to realize its magical power and he can finally perceive magic. Suddenly, he begins to feel a tremendous pain. He starts coughing blood and wonders why it suddenly feels like his body is going to explode. He begins to kneel from the pain as all that energy is pouring into his body. He worries and asks if he's going to die like this. However, he starts to get angry, saying there's no way he can die like this, because if he dies now, how will he look for his family? Outraged by the situation, he endures all that pain and screams, gathering as much energy as he can. Suddenly, he finds himself in a dark place. Still confused by the whole situation, he says this is really strange and asks why all that magic power suddenly vanished and everything went black out of nowhere. Not understanding what's happening, he wonders if the lights were turned off. He starts to stand up, saying he'll go out and see what's going on. However, when he moves his hand, he feels something strange. He grabs the sphere in his hand and starts asking what it is. Could it be a ball or even an egg? Suddenly, the sphere begins to display a system screen saying, "Dear Mr. Lynn Lanster, greetings." This startles him greatly. He drops the sphere and backs away as much as he can, asking what that is. The sphere says it is his butler and emphasizes that it has been waiting for him for over 10 years. The sphere begins to emit a strange amount of energy and welcomes him, saying that sacred place belongs exclusively to the protagonist. Things begin to shift, and suddenly everything that was black begins to take form. The sphere says, "This is the home of dragons." Hearing that, Lin is terrified, imagining enormous and extremely powerful dragons. So he starts looking around, asking if there are any dragons nearby. The system says that once the dragon egg in front of him hatches, there will be dragons there. The protagonist is surprised and asks if that really is a dragon egg. The system says that's exactly what it is and emphasizes that this is the first dragon egg the protagonist has received, explaining to him that he cannot return to the real world until he successfully raises his first dragon and completes the basic feeding task. Lin hits the system, angry, asking if this is a joke and if he'll really be able to return after raising it because once it hatches, the dragon will eat him alive. Suddenly, he hears a noise and looks to the side, seeing the egg's shell cracking. He gets scared as he sees part of the dragon already sticking out. The system, still injured from the protagonist's attack, says that this is a friendly reminder and explains that if he doesn't drip some of his own blood onto the dragon egg before the shell fully breaks, the dragon will indeed eat him after hatching. This makes Lin even more terrified. Time is running out, and even without understanding what's happening, he takes some of his blood, saying he has to do this to form a bond with that kind of monster that has the power to destroy the world. Before the egg finally cracks, he jumps in to place his blood. Suddenly, an unimaginable amount of energy bursts out of the egg, throwing the protagonist far away. He slowly opens his eyes and asks if he succeeded. Looking in front of him, he sees a small baby dragon. He's even a little relieved, wondering if that's really a dragon, the most terrifying creature in the world. He flicks the dragon, knocking it down. He starts to feel a little calmer, wondering if this is serious, and thinks relieved that it's just a hatchling, so there's nothing to fear. Lin decides to help the baby dragon and removes part of the eggshell that was blocking its vision. However, the dragon becomes extremely angry, asking how a lowly human dares to touch him, and attacks by kicking him in the face. Seeing this overwhelming strength, Lin says that it really is a dragon, and apparently he can understand the dragon's language, probably thanks to the system. Several system windows pop up in front of him saying, "Task completed. Congratulations on acquiring your first dragon. Dragon Creator. You have earned 5 experience points and 50 gold. You've been awarded the beginner reward, 1,000 gold. The system explains that gold can be used to buy feed, field structures, and field expansions. System gold and real-world gold are equivalent at a 1-to-1 exchange rate. Lin starts to get a little more excited and asks if he can really use real money. The system asks him to continue the main task and explains that he needs to build a fire-type dragon nest. The reward is 5 experience points and 50 gold. The protagonist holds the baby dragon in his hands and asks if he really has to build a fire-type dragon nest, because if that's true, then he should build a home for that little hatchling. The baby dragon starts to get angry and tries to breathe fire at the protagonist, saying that no one would appreciate a house made by a human and asking if he's joking. However, Lin doesn't even care about what the baby dragon is saying and starts messing with the system. He notices he can build a beginner fire-type dragon nest with just 100 gold, and that's not expensive at all. The dragon keeps complaining, asking the protagonist to let him go because how could he use a house made by a human? Suddenly, something starts being built nearby, and quickly the system notifies that the area has been expanded and congratulates him for completing the task, stating that he earned 5 experience points and 50 gold. Beginner Fire-type Dragon Nest, Fire-type Dragon's Paradise. Growth, 1 more day, can hold up to 500 gold. Seeing that, the little dragon is completely delighted by the place. Without a second thought, he jumps right into the little volcano, enjoying the moment. Lin asks the hatchling if he didn't just say he didn't want that and calls him a big liar. But at least, he says, his body is honest. The protagonist looks at his little dragon and says that, with the way it keeps yelling ya 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 all the time, it should just be called ya ya. However, he hears a noise and, paying attention to the dragon, notices that it's asleep. He's surprised, saying that this creature really has a very simple mind. After the dragon falls asleep, the protagonist decides to follow some of the system's instructions and completes a few basic tasks. Everything is finished with just a few taps. It's quite comfortable to be a dragon breeder. The plants he planted are dragon scale fruits, one of the dragon race's favorite fruits. Their growth period is only 1 day. After feeding, the dragon's growth will increase by 10. Lin looks at the system and says he's awakened the dragon and completed all tasks and asks if he can leave now. The system tells him to use the command exit to leave that place. When he snaps his fingers and says exit, the entire world he was in begins to fade away and he returns to his bed. As he slowly opens his eyes, he realizes several people are around him. He asks why everyone is there staring at him. The people are shocked by him. He asks what happened for them to be so stunned. Carl and a young man tell him to look at the ceiling, and as he does, he sees that it's completely destroyed. The two cheer, saying the young master managed to blow up the ceiling. Even he is shocked, asking how he did that. Trying to dodge the subject, he asks if it's really worth celebrating something like that. The young boy says yes, they should celebrate, because at that moment, the protagonist managed to unleash. Blaine interrupts the boy, saying that Lin unleashed an extremely powerful amount of magical energy, so that truly came from him. Hearing that he actually did that, the protagonist is stunned. He looks at his hand and says he understands now. He can really sense magical power. He starts wondering if it's because of the magic book Oliver gave him. While the others celebrate in the back, he wonders why he entered a strange space right when he awakened his magic. The protagonist calls Carl and asks him to take a look at the book. He explains that he'd like the knight to try following the book's instructions for cultivation and report if he feels anything different. Shortly after, the protagonist says that neither Carl nor his uncle felt anything unusual after reading the book, so maybe only he can enter that mysterious space. And every time he tries to tell others about it, the system doesn't allow it. Furthermore, ever since he blew up the roof, whenever he tries to meditate, he ends up coughing blood. The system appears, warning that the dragon's level will be the limit of his magic level. Forcing it too much could cause the user's body to explode. Lin must quickly raise the fire dragon Yiya to level 1. Until the dragon reaches level 1, the user cannot use magic. After receiving this information, he realizes that all this time, it was the system that limited his magic power absorption. Frustrated with this situation, Lin tries not to return to the ranch. However, that damn butler invades his real life, even showing up outside the subspace saying that the food is insufficient and therefore the fire dragon Yiya's health dropped to -10. He tries to just keep eating and ignore that message, but the system starts yelling at him, saying that while maybe he can ignore his own basic needs, the hatchling is starving. The system questions what kind of truly qualified farmer he is. Aside from Lin, no one else seems to know about the dragon's subspace, or even the system. Blaine notices the protagonist seems a bit off, and asks why he's not eating. Lin tries to cover up and says he suddenly lost his appetite. One of the maids appears bringing another plate of food for him. Blaine asks how he can eat so little and emphasizes that he should eat more, as practicing magic is very good for the body. Lin thanks his uncle for the words, but the system starts laughing. Blaine goes on to say that he's already informed Oliver about the protagonist's magic awakening, and that he may come to take Lin to study at their magic academy, Sagrada. Lin is surprised and asks if he's really going to the Holy Iris Academy. The Sagrada Academy is the best magic academy in the Orande Empire. Oliver and the protagonist's father were both students there. Zoe was one of the most talented students in the entire academy. While relaxing in his room, lying on the bed and happy about the news, several warning messages suddenly pop up in front of him. The system notifies that the fire dragon Yiya's health has dropped below 10, and if the protagonist doesn't return quickly and feed it, then, if the dragon dies, the breeder will be reverted into a dragon egg as compensation for the loss of the ranch. Lin becomes desperate upon reading that and asks what kind of weird rule that is. After learning this, he has no choice but to feed the dragon every day. While the little dragon eats, Lin thinks it really has a huge appetite. He never imagined it would end up draining energy like that. He then thinks that maybe if the dragon eats and sleeps well, it'll level up faster, and that would prevent the little hatchling from developing anomalies. The protagonist flicks the dragon on the head again, making it angry, yelling for the bro not to hit its head. The dragon tries to hit him back, saying it's getting stronger. The system appears and says the protagonist is becoming more and more of a qualified breeder. Lin says he's also becoming more and more like a wolf in sheep's clothing. The system says it doesn't matter what the ranch master says, but just reminds him that it was thanks to them that he finally managed to perceive magical power. Lin looks at the system and asks if it's really thanks to it that he can feel magic. The butler says yes, and emphasizes that it can give even more. The protagonist asks what that means. Suddenly, the place starts changing, and the butler says that the fire dragon, Yiya, has successfully reached level 1. And with that, the protagonist has unlocked the magical training room. The butler asks why he doesn't try the first lesson inside the training room. As soon as he enters, the first thing he must do is the meditation balance board. Lin tries to balance, saying he won't fall the moment he loses concentration. So how is he supposed to concentrate and meditate? A timer appears, and after 5 seconds, the butler warns that time's up and the meditation failed, so he'll now drop the hammer of retribution. The hammer starts falling with 40 tons. The protagonist is extremely scared, saying that's brutal. However, the hammer hits him in the not knowing what the hell is going on. The butler says that unless he successfully meditates, he'll never be able to leave the balance board. And if he fails to meditate for 5 seconds, the hammer of retribution will be released again. Seeing he has no way out, he tries his best to focus and asks the system if it's trying to train him or kill him. However, 5 seconds pass and he can't concentrate. This time, 80 tons hit him. This happens over and over until finally, he starts to focus. And the butler congratulates him for completing the training, stating that he has just leveled up. With his face all bruised, he smiles, because he's now at level 1. Sometime later, he goes into the forest and says it's been 7 days of hard training, so he should now be able to experience all that power. He activates his magic perception, and magic begins to surround him. Embarrassing. Thankfully, no one is around to see it. However, when he looks to the side, he sees little Jack standing there. Jack runs off, shouting that the young master can use fire magic. The protagonist is so embarrassed, he yells for him to shut up and not tell anyone something so humiliating. However, a small attack shoots toward Jack, but he manages to dodge. Lin is surprised, wondering if it's just his imagination or if the fireball got a bit stronger. The butler appears and says Lin should pay attention as the power of magic is affected by the farmer's proficiency. The protagonist gets excited and asks little Jack if he wants to try again, but the boy starts crying, screaming for him to stay away. Lin's peaceful days in that small fief came to an end, marked by Jack's joyful screams. After Oliver received Blaine's letter, he sent back an acceptance letter from the Sacred Academy. Lin was overjoyed and hugged his uncle with all the love in the world. Because of that, all the villagers looked at him warmly, wishing him good luck and asking him to take care of himself as much as possible. And with that heartfelt farewell, Lin Lanster finally stepped onto the road for the first time to become a great mage. It takes about a month by carriage to travel from the fief to the academy. During the day, Jack would guide them to the academy, and at night, the protagonist would go to the ranch to train and raise his dragons. Without even noticing it, the little dragon kept getting bigger. Yiya was now a bit annoyed, staring at the protagonist. Lin asks why Yiya is looking at him like that. Currently, the little dragon's stats are Level 3, Skills Dragon Breath, Dragon Power, Fire Magic Immunity, Magic Bite, Fireball, Shield, Habitat, Small Fire Dragon Nest. A red message appears saying the situation is critical due to overcrowding. Exit, 10 gold coins per minute. Growth value, 3 out of 500. Health value, 100 out of 100. Suddenly, the dragon attacks the protagonist, saying it wants a new habitat. Lin gets scared, saying that this little hatchling is much more lovable than the butler. The protagonist says he'll give him a new habitat, but before that, he wants the dragon to come with him to see the outside world. Yiya stares at the protagonist, asking if he's being serious. The butler says that upon receiving the farmer master's command, he will transfer the host and Yiya to the designated location. The dragon starts getting excited. Lin asks what's wrong and if he's scared, but the dragon says that's nonsense. He's not afraid of anything. However, at the exact moment the two are teleported out, someone notices and opens their eyes. A powerful warrior with a giant dragon asks why there is a dragon outside the Rift Valley. Yiya slowly opens his eyes and asks his master where they are. He says that place is much bigger than that miserable place he was in before. The protagonist asks Yiya if he's enjoying it and if he wants to fly around a bit. The dragon gets extremely happy and spreads his wings. After a month, the protagonist gradually realigned his thoughts, realizing there's no getting rid of that strange ranch, so he might as well work with it. Lin decided he will help raise dragons, and that will help him grow stronger and stronger, until he can find his father and clear his family's name. Suddenly, an arrow comes flying toward them, but Yiya manages to dodge. Lin gets scared and wonders if there are dragon hunters around. However, a small explosion occurs in the forest and cries for help begin to echo. But he also hears people saying they must not retreat, because this is the caravan's last hope. He also hears someone saying they shouldn't care about the caravan because if they do, they'll die quietly. And that's exactly why they must deliver the goods. The protagonist asks if this is a robbery. He continues hearing voices pleading for help and mercy until suddenly he hears someone shouting for the young master. He instantly recognizes the voice and realizes that little Jack is also caught in the middle of all that. Serpents were surrounding them while they were tied to a tree. Jack was starting to cry. He thought his young master had been so focused on practicing magic that he lost a lot of weight. So Jack decided to go out and look for some food for him. However, as he was passing by the caravan, a group of bad guys came out from the forest. They quickly defeated all the soldiers guarding the caravan. Their leader approached the head of the Mason Trade Guild, named Lucas, and demanded he reveal where the goods were hidden. Otherwise, his entire group would be destroyed one by one. The bandit leader used one of his snakes to attack a soldier who quickly began to die. He warned that this would continue if the leader didn't cooperate. Lucas started to panic as he saw his companions falling, but even so, he shut his eyes and began to cry. Trembling, he said he couldn't do it because the buyer of those goods was extremely powerful. If they lost them, they'd be crushed and unable to sell anything ever again. The bandit leader stared at him and said it was fine. They'd keep going anyway. He snapped his fingers and a snake slithered toward little Jack. Terrified, Jack could only think of apologizing to his young master, believing he wouldn't be able to serve him anymore. The snake lunged, but a fireball shot across the sky, burning the ropes and the snakes. The bandit leader asked what was going on, but something was coming toward him. The protagonist kicked him in the face and jumped to the other side. He mocked the bandit, saying he had a very flexible body. Struggling to stay upright, the bandit leader got up while his men asked if he was okay. Jack was amazed to see his young master had come to save him. Lin told him to step back because things were getting dangerous. At that moment, the two groups faced each other, and the bandit said that if that fire magic was cast by the brat in front of them, then he must be at least a third-level mage. But the leader, still furious, asked if a third-level mage was enough to make them all wet their pants. He asked if they had forgotten who the real leader of the gang was. Drawing his sword, he said he was also a third-level knight and that, compared to a mage who needed chanting, knights had absolute dominance in close combat. He attacked, but the protagonist dodged and was surprised by the strength of his opponent. The bandit leader continued to attack fiercely while Lin tried to evade all his strikes. He thought the bandit was right. Mages have no advantage in close-quarters combat. Plus, it was Yaya who cast that fire spell, but to avoid revealing the existence of his dragon, Lin had ordered him to return to the ranch immediately. The bandit leader kept charging and asked Lin if dodging was all he could do. With a quick movement, he appeared behind Lin, who was surprised by his speed. The protagonist tried to dodge, but not fast enough. The attack grazed him and sent him flying. Wounded, he got up trembling, thinking he couldn't keep dodging forever. At least all that time spent on the ranch was paying off, since he had increased his agility and mental strength in the training room. Now he had to fight. He began gathering magic in his hand and called out to the flames. But before he could finish the chant, the bandit leader struck a... He was so naive it was almost cute. He added that in front of a knight of equal level, a mage had absolutely no chance in a fight. Then he threw the protagonist hard against a rock. After taking so many hits, Lin was breathing heavily and could barely stand. He realized he was truly at a disadvantage. Facing that man head-on would be a major problem. Suddenly, the system appeared, stating that it had detected the ranch master was fighting for the first time and would now begin synchronizing with dragon magic. This caught Lin completely off guard. The butler continued explaining that the ranch master was currently a level 1 fire dragon ranch master. Available skills: basic magic, shield, bite, and claw. Instant fire magic, fireball. The system asked if he wanted to proceed with the import. The protagonist started wondering if the instant fireball was the ability the hatchling got after eating the dragon scale fruit, and he was extremely shocked to discover he could actually use the dragon's magic. The butler confirms that it's all true, stating that dragon magic is naturally 2 levels above human magic, and emphasizing that Lin can use dragon magic as long as it doesn't exceed his own level. The more dragons the protagonist has, the more types of magic he'll be able to use. Lin starts smiling, thinking the system really is amazing. He selects yes. However, the bandit charges again and kicks him, telling him not to get distracted during a fight. He mocks him, asking where the magic he's so proud of is, and if he isn't going to use it. He starts stomping on Lin, saying that if he's really not going to use magic anymore, then he doesn't stand a chance of winning. He prepares for the final blow, but at the last second, Lin reaches out to confirm the butler's prompt. The bandit leader sneers, asking if that skinny waist of his can handle the attack. Lin quickly turns and uses the instant fireball, which takes the form of a dragon, causing a deafening roar. The bandit leader manages to dodge, but his sword is completely melted. The entire gang starts to panic, realizing the protagonist used instant cast magic. With a trembling voice, the leader asks if he can really use that kind of spell. Lin gets up and starts laughing, asking the bandit if in front of a mage who can instantly cast spells, he still thinks a knight without a sword stands a chance. The gang all kneel, asking if the protagonist wants to share a meal with them. However, Lin continues his assault, unleashing an explosion that blasts everyone away while yelling at them to disappear. Shortly after saving everyone, Lucas asks if the healing magic is working properly. Lin says yes and thanks the leader of the merchants, noting that his wounds are all healed. Lucas replies that there's no need to thank him, and in fact, everyone there should be thanking Lin, since it was all thanks to him that they managed to protect the valuable goods. This confuses Lin a bit, making him wonder if they're thanking him not for saving their lives, but for saving the merchandise. He's shocked, realizing that for merchants, goods are more valuable than human lives. Suddenly, they say they've finally arrived, and that this is the caravan's unexpected harvest. They pull off a cloth and reveal a maiden from the elf forest. An alpha was tied up, being treated like a product. The moment Lin sees her, he's stunned, since that species has been extinct ever since dragons destroyed the world. the life form most similar to humans. Those are the elves. The merchant leader starts laughing, saying no man could resist that. Such an adorable child, and tells Lin to accept it. Lin starts getting irritated. Lucas hugs him, saying that they're all men there, so there's nothing to be ashamed of. He gets even closer, saying he wants to share something, and explains that when they found the elf, everyone was enchanted. She only looked scared and had no injuries, but the mercenaries around her might have died protecting her. After all, something that beautiful could be sold for at least 1 million gold. Moreover, he says that this isn't just a thank you gift for Lin, but also a sincere invitation to join the Maison Trade Guild. Lin asks if that's really an invitation. The guild leader says yes, adding that the guild recently faced a major crisis, and if they had a few more geniuses like Lin who can instantly cast magic, the trade guild could grow stronger. Lin walks toward the cage holding the elf and thanks Lucas for the gesture. He uses his fire magic to burn the ropes binding the elf. Lucas panics and asks what he's doing. Lin begins breaking the cage, saying that merchants who treat life as merchandise are unacceptable to him. Lucas gets nervous and asks if Lin knows how valuable that item is. This would cost them a fortune. Lin fires a small fireball at the ground, frightening the guild leader. He runs off, terrified of Lin, saying he can do whatever he wants. The other soldiers, also afraid after witnessing Lin's power, flee, leaving the elf behind. Lin continues using fire magic and melts the cage that held her. He reaches out and tells her there's no need to be afraid. He's there to free her. A bit hesitant, having only been treated as merchandise until now, she avoids his hand at first, but eventually accepts his help and steps out of the cage. He asks if the flames hurt her. Shy, she lowers her gaze and thanks him, but he smiles and says it was nothing. The protagonist introduces himself as Lin, and if she doesn't mind, asks for her name. The elf becomes even more embarrassed. He also feels a bit embarrassed, thinking that she got startled too easily, like a little bunny. He tries to ease the situation by saying it's okay if she doesn't want to tell him her name, since they'll meet again anyway. He turns around and starts walking away, telling her she should leave that place and not let anyone else capture her. But she suddenly shouts no, and even though she's very shy, she starts trying to speak and yells that her name is Nike. Still introverted, she says that if she told him her name, then he wouldn't push her away. The elf grabs the protagonist's arm, showing a bit of fear and gratitude. Meanwhile, little Jack was roasting some meat. He laughed happily, saying he finally managed to get some meat for his master. Inside the carriage, Nike was eating very quickly, like she hadn't eaten in days. Lin gets startled and tells her to slow down or she might choke. He asks if she wants some water, and the elf is surprised, quickly taking the cup from his hand and starting to drink. He then asks why, after finally gaining her freedom, she chose to stay by his side instead of returning to her clan. Nike becomes a bit sad and with tears in her eyes starts explaining that she can't go back. She says it's because she was too playful and got lost in the forest, and by the time she found her way home, her clan had already vanished and the village had been destroyed with humans everywhere. The humans were angry because the elves had been there just the day before. However, one of them said they shouldn't keep complaining and should search a bit more around because even finding a single elf could bring in a lot of money. Suddenly, one of the soldiers heard a noise and looked to the side, seeing a flower basket. Nike began running through the forest as fast as she could, thinking how the chief of her clan had already warned that once they won, humans were to be avoided. But she got a little careless and tripped on a rope left as a trap. When she looked back, it was already too late, and that's how she got caught. That's why she desperately tried to escape and find the members of her clan. But no matter how many times she tried to run, she was always captured in the end. While telling her story, she trembled, cried, and kept her head down because her whole life, her family, and her home had been completely destroyed and taken from her by force. The protagonist becomes extremely angry hearing this and slams the table, calling those people nothing but bandits. The elf is startled by his anger, but he quickly calms down and says that anger wasn't directed at her. A bit awkward, he admits he's also human and asks if she's afraid of him. But Nike says no, which surprises him. She emphasizes that he is her benefactor. She remembers that he said merchants treat life like merchandise and that he wouldn't accept that. That's why she believes he's different from the bad men. Lin looks at the elf a bit embarrassed and says it was nothing, adding that since she feels that way, she can follow him for now. And if they find clues about the whereabouts of the elf clan, he'll help her return. Nike smiles happily and thanks him. He explains that he's heading to the academy now, but only staff are allowed to stay on school grounds. The elf starts getting excited, and he says that if she doesn't mind, she could pretend to be his maid. Upon hearing that, she goes silent, begins to tremble, and even stammers, saying her grandfather once told her that maid is an extremely dangerous word, but still she believes she can do it. Lin gets flustered and shouts that she's getting the wrong idea, stressing that he won't make her do anything weird, and explains that all she needs to do is call him young master and change her clothes. He also says that as for everyone else, she doesn't need to worry about them. This calms her down and she starts smiling again, saying it's fine, calling him young master. Lin breathes a little easier, thinking that apparently everything's cleared up now. He turns and starts leaving the carriage, saying it's already getting late and that she should sleep inside the carriage that night, while he'll sleep outside with little Jack. As soon as he steps out, Jack asks why his master left the carriage. He asks if he's not welcome there. Little Jack says he's always welcome, but just can't understand why he'd make that choice, since a beautiful lady is right there inside the carriage, and yet he still wants to sleep outside. The protagonist gets a bit annoyed and tells him to stop saying things like that. 3 days later, they finally arrive at the May and Holy Iris Academy. Jack says they've finally made it. As they get out, Lin remembers that Oliver had said he would tell him more about the book made from dragon bones once they arrived at the academy. He begins to wonder if Oliver already knew there were dragons inside the book when he sent it. Suddenly, the butler appears, saying that it has detected the host's arrival at the Holy Iris Academy. He tells him to explore the academy to find quest clues and unlock the water dragon egg. Lin is surprised to learn that there are other dragons. The butler tells the farmer not to be so dismissive and asks if having more dragons wouldn't make him stronger. The protagonist asks if he can really get stronger. The system says yes, and emphasizes that the farmer has only hatched 1 dragon egg so far, and that his current status is Farmer Lin, first-class mage level, total unlocked species, 1. The butler explains that as long as the farmer continues to complete missions and unlock the 6 dragon egg types, fire, water, wind, earth, light, and darkness, then he'll gain affinity with all magical attributes. Lin begins reflecting on all magical attributes and gets excited, saying that if he can become a sage-level mage, things will be much easier. And the higher the risk, the greater the reward. That's the kind of trade-off that's worth it. Excited to discover he can get even stronger and master all magical attributes, he starts heading toward the academy. He looks back and tells Little Jack and Nike to wait for him, because the young master will return triumphant. Little Jack excitedly wishes his master good luck, while the elf, overjoyed with everything, says everything will be all right. Inside the school, everything ran on magic. Students receiving deliveries, others learning how to cast spells. Seeing all of it, the protagonist says this is exactly what he expected from a magic academy. He approaches a statue and stares at it. Suddenly, someone calls out to him saying that Associate Dean Oliver is away on business and won't be there for a while. He turns and looks at the man speaking to him. The man explains that Oliver made an exception for him, but the academy has a tradition and he'll need to follow him for the entrance test. Lin smiles and says he has no problem with that. Elsewhere, several people were gathered, wondering if the people entering the association were talented. Some said they believed the magic affinity or talent level must be at least average or high, but most thought they were just average. One student shouted that maybe one of them is high level since he was chosen by Oliver. Suddenly, the protagonist shows up, and people are a bit startled, saying he's arrived. Without hesitation, he walks past everyone like a true king. A man holding a crystal ball calls Lin and says his name is Fred Edmund, and he will test the protagonist's magical talent. He asks if Lin is ready. The protagonist smiles and says yes. Fred says he admires the protagonist's confidence. He tosses the crystal ball and tells Lin to just relax his mind and place his hand on it. However, Lin hesitates for a moment, realizing he forgot to check something. He calls the butler and asks if the ranch will be detected by the crystal, because if they discover Yia's existence, it could be a huge problem. The system tells him not to worry, as the crystal only detects his magical talent level and nothing more. Fred calls Lin's attention, saying he's taking too long. The protagonist apologizes, starts to focus, and places his hand on the magical crystal, thinking that his magical talent shouldn't be bad since his father was a genius. Suddenly, the crystal begins to change color and emit a yellow light. Fred is impressed and wonders if that's really the supreme level, because if that's the case, then Lin is truly discreet. He reflects that the Academy has never made exceptions before to keep things fair, and he even complained to Oliver about it. But that child, he asks if someone like that could really exist. Then he suddenly starts laughing and kneels down, announcing that Lin Lanster's test result shows low talent level, fire element, and weak affinity. Everyone around begins to feel disappointed, including the protagonist, who keeps trying to pour more of his magic into the crystal, asking how that could be possible. But Fred turns around, clearly uneasy about the situation. The butler appears again, saying that unfortunately the protagonist didn't let him finish speaking earlier. He explains that Lin's magic awakening method is different from everyone else's, so his talent is limited according to his current magic level, meaning his talent will only increase as his magic level rises. Lin asks if the butler is joking. The students around start commenting, saying he's weak and that, despite all the talk about him, there's nothing special. He's not even average, and that makes others question why Oliver chose someone like that. Fred approaches Lin, sighs, and says that the associate dean made an exception for him, so Fred can't say much. He hands Lin his materials and asks him to show up the next day on time. Suddenly, someone approaches and calls out to him. The butler warns that an important quest character has been detected. He says the person's name is Augustine and his position is president of the Truth Student Union. The butler explains that the quest requires the protagonist to defeat him in the Mage's Trial Tower to obtain the fragment of the Water Dragon Egg. However, that will only unlock after completing the pre-quest of the Mage's Trial. Quest difficulty: high. Lin is surprised and starts to wonder if the system can really assess other people's strength, and it seems his first target won't be easy. Augustine walks up to him and politely demands that he give up his student uniform and badge and leave the academy immediately. He says he doesn't know what tricks the protagonist used to deceive the associate dean. But for garbage like him to sneak into the academy with such underhanded methods, just standing there already stains the academy's honor. Hearing this, Lin starts remembering his childhood, being humiliated by other children, told to go away, asked if he thought a trader's son could just buy cereal from the store. Those people insulted him, saying that for trash like him, born of a fool, just standing there polluted the air they breathed. The protagonist starts smiling and says that, for a president, Augustine sure talks like a gangster. He asks Augustine one thing: isn't a president who stubbornly belittles others just because they're less privileged the one truly staining the academy's name? Other students nearby ask where Lin's going with that, saying someone like him, who came in through the back door, has no right to talk about dignity. One of them adds that the president shouldn't stress over a student like that at bourse. He won't even pass the test, so sooner or later he'll be expelled anyway. Lin begins to get irritated and fire magic starts forming in his hand, but he takes a deep breath and thinks he needs to calm down. Even though he's furious, he doesn't want to give up. He admits to himself that it's true he entered through the back door and that arguing is pointless. If he can't get along with his classmates and teachers, his studies will suffer, and that'll make it much harder to build a solid foundation to become a sage-level mage. The protagonist turns around and starts walking, leaving them standing there. However, the people begin to laugh, saying he talks too much and does too little, pointing out that he's running away like a coward. He looks back irritated, thinking that he needs to find the fastest way to become stronger, realizing he can't rely on the system alone anymore. With hatred in his heart for being treated like that his whole life, judged because of his father and his family and looked down upon himself, he swears that he'll use his own strength to make them all swallow their words. Shortly after, the butler welcomes the host back to the Dragon Ranch. He brings a report saying that the dragon scale fruit is ripe today, and that the small fire habitat is also producing normally. However, the fire dragon Yiya is upset. Yiya starts sucking in air and spits fire at the protagonist, yelling angrily and asking why he still hasn't upgraded the habitat. Lin brings some fruit to the dragon, asking him to be a little more patient and endure for just 2 more days. After that, he promises to make the change. He asks the dragon to eat some of the dragon scale fruit first, but Yiya refuses and starts throwing a tantrum, saying the protagonist said the same thing 2 days ago and that he won't eat anything else if the habitat isn't upgraded. Lin starts force-feeding the fruit to the dragon and says he really will keep his promise next time. The dragon calls him a liar and asks if Lin really thinks he'll care just because he was fed. The protagonist sighs and says his dragon really acts like a child, then tells the butler he wants to leave. While being teleported back, he thinks that the small fire habitat generates 500 gold per day and that, after planting a few fruits, he still has a bit of money left. However, to upgrade the small fire habitat, he'll need 10,000 gold. The next day, he gets up and says he needs to find a quick way to make money. While getting dressed, he says he could work as a waiter, transport goods, or even take on a few mercenary quests. He thinks that raising a child really isn't easy. Suddenly, he hears a sweet voice calling him, saying it's time for breakfast. He opens his bedroom door, saying he's on his way. But when he sees Nike, he's speechless. She shows him her outfit, saying the inn servant told her it was the outfit he picked for her. Embarrassed, she asks if he thinks it looks strange. Lin walks over to her and gently pats her head, saying it's not strange at all. He explains that it's the kind of outfit maids usually wear in the human world. However, he lowers his gaze slightly and admits that maybe he went a little too far with her. The protagonist tries to explain that if it weren't for the academy only allowing maids to accompany students, he would have given her a beautiful dress. Upon hearing those words, she is completely charmed by her master's thoughtfulness and kindness. She runs to hug him, saying that she'll never feel like a burden as long as she's by his side. Lin wonders what Nike radiates, a pure essence of the forest. He looks at her and says it's all right, adding that they'll head to school after they finish getting ready. Once he arrives at the school, he thinks that the entrance exam he took the day before made him famous across the academy. A man sitting at a desk asks if he's Lin Lanster, and the protagonist says yes. Though visibly annoyed, the man approves him. Lin thinks that although their attitude was terrible, none of them tried to make things difficult. After approving him, the man throws a paper at him, saying everything's ready and that he just needs to take it to his assigned classroom, which is in the construction zone, Section 1B. Once there, he needs to introduce himself to the teacher. Lin follows the instructions and heads to his class, and everything was going smoothly, except for the teacher. As soon as he enters the room, the teacher slams her desk, yelling at him to stop and demanding to know who let him in. This is Professor Yisha. She calls out the protagonist, saying the things she despises most are nobles who rely solely on connections. She emphasizes that even if the whole school allowed him to enter through the back door as an exception from the associate dean, she will never allow him to stay in her class. Upon hearing her speak that way, the other students start mocking him. He turns a bit irritated and asks the butler to scan everyone's abilities. The system appears, saying it will do so immediately, and a few seconds later reports the results. Kalu, first-class freshman mage; Shua, second-class freshman mage; Lucerne, first-class freshman mage; Yummy, first-class freshman mage. The protagonist starts to smile and wonders if there really isn't anyone stronger than him there. questioning how an academy of this level can be teaching people so ignorant that they enjoy ridiculing others. He turns to the teacher and asks what the subject of the class is. She's surprised to see that he's still there and asks what he's talking about. He looks at her and says that she doesn't want him in class because she's afraid his lack of talent will affect it. But if he proves that he can outperform every student in the room, then that should mean he has the right to stay. The students continue mocking him, asking how he thinks he'll do better than them. Another explains that the class is about potions. Lucerne says it all depends on someone's level. The higher the level and the better the mana stability, the purer the potion. Yisha, silently watching Lin, says this is very interesting. She says he's quite confident and asks if he's willing to raise the stakes. She says she'll give him a chance, explaining that in 1 week they'll have a potion class test. If he comes in first place, she'll allow him to stay. However, if he doesn't, he'll have to leave the school and never set foot there again. That offer leaves the protagonist a little uneasy. He begins to think that if he loses for any reason, he'll be expelled, making this a very serious bet. The teacher continues to look down on him and with a firm gaze asks what he thinks and if he's going to accept the challenge or not. The system appears, announcing that the main quest, Water Dragon Egg Yisha's Bet, has been activated. Win condition, place first in the potion exam. Difficulty, low. Rewards, Water Dragon Egg Fragment +1. Total fragments needed to obtain the Water Dragon Egg, 10, plus 20 magical experience. Lin is surprised and wonders how he could have forgotten for a moment that he still has the butler, because as long as the quest is recorded, the mission is doable. On top of that, there are rewards. Now much more confident, he looks at the teacher and says he accepts the bet and all she has to do now is wait and see the result. He starts walking out of the room while Yisha watches him, thinking that the boy still acts that way even after getting scolded. She thinks that not only did he choose not to rely on the dean, but he's also trying to prove his worth in a dignified way. That makes her reflect and wonder if the rumors about him are wrong. She keeps watching him and thinks that this is all very interesting and that things are starting to get much more exciting around here. Despite her strict demeanor, she thinks about his name and hopes he'll stay and surprise her again. Shortly after, in the Academy's library, the protagonist is extremely excited and impressed with the place. He says it's no wonder people say that the LS Academy Library is the most breathtaking place in the Empire because it's truly grand. He starts walking through the place and looking at the shelves, saying there must be many books about magic potions there. While searching for his books, 2 students show up and say, "That's Lin, the loser who got into the academy through the back door." They ask what he's doing there. Another student says that if he's not mistaken, this is the class time for first years, so maybe Lin got kicked out for being too dumb. They keep mocking him, saying it's shameful for the whole school. The protagonist starts getting annoyed and turns to them, saying that clearly they do know how to talk big. Suddenly, a woman arrives and scolds the 2 students, saying they should be ashamed. The 2 look startled. She says upperclassmen shouldn't act like that and reminds them they're third years and still haven't learned that bullying is forbidden in the library. She warns that if they don't shut up immediately, she'll personally make sure their credits are deducted. The blue-haired student remains irritated and asks if she thinks she's something special just for being a library counselor. But his friend says that's enough because he doesn't want to lose any credits. So it's time to leave. The 2 walk away and the protagonist looks at her, thinking that it seems she saved him this time. Noticing she's being watched, she gets a little embarrassed and apologizes, trying to explain what happened with those students. Lin asks why she's apologizing when those 2 idiots were the ones who started it. Still embarrassed, she says she's the library counselor, so if something bad happens in that reading environment, it's her responsibility. Lin is left speechless by that and thinks she really has a heavy sense of duty. He tries to change the subject, saying that anyway, he intended to borrow some books on magical potions and asks if he can count on her help to find some. She says yes and introduces herself, saying he can call her Vivian. She begins using her magic and a book starts glowing green. Other books begin glowing too and float toward them. All the books land in the protagonist's hands one by one. He thinks that's really amazing and exactly what you'd expect from the Great Magic Academy. Vivian tells him that's the full collection of writings on magical potions. She also says she heard he's preparing for the potion test. She adds that she doesn't quite understand why he's studying like that because it's not a written test but a practical exam. She asks if it's really a good idea to just read those books. Lin looks at her and wonders if Vivian is really worried about him. Suddenly, the butler appears, saying that Yisha's bet quest hint is, wealth and beauty can be acquired through diligent study. He looks at Vivian and tells her not to worry so much, because he's very confident. He starts walking and as he passes by her says that to be honest, since he entered the academy, Vivian is the first person who didn't judge him based solely on rumors. He thanks her again for everything she did for him today and, smiling, says he'll treat her to dinner once he passes the test. He says goodbye and keeps walking away. She hears everything and is left speechless, holding her dress with a bit of shyness. But then she remembers someone asked her if she remembered what her task was, emphasizing that she must do whatever it takes to stay close to the student Lin. And so, a bit flustered and uncomfortable, she says that the apologies she made earlier weren't because of those students' behavior. A little later that day, at the protagonist's residence at the academy, Little Jack asks his young master to stop reading those books and eat something. He says he'll eat and asks Jack to wait just a bit longer so he can finish the book. Night falls and Little Jack remains annoyed, saying his master has been reading since early morning. The protagonist says he only has 1 week until the test, so he has to move fast to have time to finish reading everything. 5 days later, Lin is completely worn out, lying in the middle of the books. He holds his head and says that must have been what the hint was referring to. The key to solving those problems is yaya. The art of potion alchemy requires great mental fortitude. Beginners have low control over their minds, and therefore many require dragon saliva as an additional ingredient in their first attempts. But if the procedure is done that way, even ordinary people can create high-level potions that can be compared to those made by renowned alchemists. A few more days passed, and finally the day of the potion test arrived. After finishing his potion, all the other students said it had to be some kind of joke and questioned whether he really managed to create a real potion, asking how he had achieved such sharp mental focus. Shua got angry and yelled that the protagonist was a cheater. Yisha smacked him on the head with a piece of paper. She got annoyed and asked what they thought they'd accomplish by causing a ruckus during an evaluation, questioning if they all wanted to fail immediately. Shua got sad, lowered his head, thinking his teacher was fiercer than a mad dog. And he's literally a dog. The teacher began staring at the protagonist and looked at the potion he created. She started wondering if he really managed to get such a refined reagent using only his own skills. Then she used her magic to pick up the potion and said he really didn't do badly at all. She kept looking and analyzing the potion, saying that this truly was a potion of excellent quality. She noted that if no other student could make a better one, then the highest score would undoubtedly be his. She continued smiling and said that even so, he must be aware of the doubts everyone present had. Therefore, to convince the audience, she asked if he would be willing to go up on stage and make that potion again. Lin looked a bit worried and asked if she suspected him of cheating. The students kept complaining and said that it was obvious the teacher suspected someone, and who else could it be but him? Another student said she already knew what happened and pointed out that the protagonist clearly used dragon saliva. The students started following that theory and another pointed at him, shouting that it was definitely true, claiming he must have used some supplemental ingredient that grants mental stability during potion crafting. Because otherwise, how could a talentless nobody like him succeed? After just 7 days of solo study, Lin started laughing and asked if they really thought he had used any supplementary ingredient. He remembered when he had spent days lying down without sleep, with headaches from reading so much, and asked the butler if he was right in thinking that time in his training area flowed 7 times slower than in the real world. That's why he asked if it was possible to practice potion alchemy there. He slammed the table and stood up, saying that since no one believed him, he would do exactly what everyone wanted. He grabbed a flask and began walking to the front of the class, saying he'd make that potion completely from scratch. Once again, his teacher was surprised by his attitude. She kept looking at him, wondering why he accepted the challenge so easily. The protagonist recalled when he used 5 grams of ghost vine flower stems. That was attempt number 35, which failed. Then he used 10 drops of rhino demon viper saliva, attempt number 2915, also a failure. Finally, he used 3 grams of fire crystal. It was all just the result of practicing the skill relentlessly after training so much. Both the teacher and the students were surprised, asking why the protagonist suddenly acted like someone who had been through hell and lived to tell the tale. Yisha wondered if Lin had compensated for his lack of talent with an absurd amount of training. She remained confused and asked if that was why Associate Director Oliver made an exception to admit him to the academy. And on top of all that, she thought that even knowing he likely couldn't become an exceptional mage through willpower alone, at least his perseverance should serve to inspire all the members of the Magic Academy. Yisha lowers her head and takes a deep breath, saying that she calls herself an enforcer of the institution's law, but in the end, she was a victim of her own mediocrity and judgment. The teacher takes off her hat and bows in front of everyone, asking the protagonist for forgiveness and admitting her mistake, saying she was wrong for not allowing him to attend her classes. The students are surprised to see this, and the protagonist becomes extremely embarrassed, asking her not to do that. She approaches him and says that, to be honest, 5 other students managed to create a potion comparable to his, but not only is he self-taught, he also had little time to learn everything he did, and therefore first place in that evaluation belongs to him. The system appears saying that Yisha's wager has been completed and the rewards are Water Dragon Egg +1, Magic Experience +20. Due to the farmer's choice of a less regular and more difficult path to complete the task, the additional reward, Teleportation Matrix, has been granted. Sometime later, outside the academy, the butler says the system's conclusion, for not relying on a supplemental ingredient but instead distorting the passage of time in the training field, is that the farmer acted wisely. The protagonist says that wise or not, he just wanted to build a reputation that wasn't bad, especially in the place where his father had put in so much effort. Besides, how could he use dragon saliva in such a mundane situation? He picks up one of his potions and says he still plans to trade it for real wealth. The The protagonist continues making his potions and says that the saliva from that hatchling is quite useful because with it, he can easily make advanced potions. And one bottle of those can be sold for gold. With a few flasks in hand, he mentions that he'll go to the merchant chamber tomorrow to sell them. He remembers that Yiya was extremely angry, shouting that if the protagonist didn't replace his habitat immediately, he would burn down the entire ranch. He takes a deep breath and says that the new nest for that hatchling can finally be built. Lin looks out the window and comments that it's getting late. Seeing the sunset, he wonders if Vivian has already finished work in the library since he had mentioned that he'd treat her to a meal after the test. He grabs his clothes and says that if she hadn't helped him find so many books on potions, he really doesn't know how far off track he would have gone. A little later in the library, he walks through the place but says everything feels strange because he can't find Vivian anywhere. Suddenly, someone taps his shoulder and calls him, startling him. The girl smiles and asks if his name is Lin. The protagonist steps back and says yes, asking if there's a problem. The girl steps closer and says that student Vivian is behind the school building and that, on top of that, she's getting ready to confess to him. The protagonist becomes very embarrassed and asks what she's talking about, but the girl tells him not to act that way and starts pushing him, saying that even if he plans to reject her, he should say it to her face. Lin asks the student to stop pushing him and suddenly the butler appears saying that the main quest, Water Dragon Egg, Vivian's bridal carry, is active. Conditions to complete: be carried like a princess by Vivian. Quest difficulty: low. Rewards: Water Dragon, Egg Fragment +1. Fragments collected so far, 1 of 10. Magic Experience +20. Lin stares at the quest, not understanding what kind of nonsense this is. He gets irritated again and hits the system, swearing, asking why it's giving him this kind of stuff at this hour. The girl gets confused seeing him making gestures and talking to himself. She says he'd better hurry because she heard Vivian will stay there until he shows up. She releases a bee from her hand and tells the protagonist to follow the bee as it will guide him to the location. Lin starts getting a bit more serious and thinks that something very strange is happening because he and Vivian only met once, and even if they talked for a long time, it wouldn't be enough for her to be confessing to him. Compared to the previous quest, this one seems like a huge joke. The butler announces once again that the second main quest is in progress, Vivian's bridal carry. Lin starts analyzing and thinks this isn't as simple as it seems. Suddenly, he hears a scream and begins running desperately, wondering if the scream could have come from Vivian. However, as he approaches the source of the sound, he realizes something strange is going on. The area is filled with an unusual concentration of energy. He keeps looking at the place and gets closer, questioning why such a place exists within the academy. He walks up to a structure that contains some kind of portal. The portal states that Vivian Mason has entered, awaiting the second participant. The protagonist is confused, wondering why Vivian entered and why a second participant is required. He stands in front of the portal, puzzled, as someone hidden begins preparing to attack. Suddenly, he's struck from behind, hard enough to push him forward. As he tries to turn to see who attacked him, he falls into the portal, asking what exactly is happening. A message appears. Lin Lanster has entered, initiation of approval beginning. The woman who attacked him also enters the realm. A mouth appears in her hand, laughing, and she begins to transform, saying that when he was bullied by the seniors, no one defended him. Still, he entered through the back door and everyone called him trash. So why? Since she loves helping him, she'll make sure to help him to the very end. And for that reason, the two of them can fall into despair together. On the other side of the portal, Lin is thrown out and lands on the ground in front of a huge spiked trap. As he gets up and looks ahead, he sees Vivian bound by magical chains. He asks what exactly is going on, but her mouth is sealed. He hears a noise behind him and turns to find a gigantic monster. Just its roar nearly sends him flying into the spikes. He begins assessing the situation, wondering how a magical beast could be there. The monster charges at him, and he realizes he must dodge at all costs. If he freezes because of the creature's aura, he'll die. At the last second, he manages to leap, avoiding the fierce strike. Seeing the destruction the monster caused on the ground, he notes that the beast is extremely strong, but he's also surprised since he didn't expect to be able to jump that high. Then he remembers that thanks to completing Yisha's wager, he received rewards: a water dragon fragment and 20 magic experience points. After earning those points, he became a second-rank mage. However, he hadn't expected his physical abilities to improve so much from just one level up. Realizing this, he becomes more confident and thinks he should be able to fight the beast. The monster attacks again and he dodges, noting its incredible speed. He avoids another strike. The monster keeps attacking and he keeps dodging, thinking. However, some of the chains were still enough to hold her in place. Still worried but slightly relieved that she didn't fall, he becomes irritated if he and Vivian are really going to be trapped there. He remembers that the woman at the library said Vivian was preparing to confess to him. The protagonist wonders if the whole thing was a setup, since the person who pushed him into the portal seems to be the same girl he saw in the library. Still confused about the situation, he starts questioning why someone would do something like this and what they would gain by trying to kill them. He tries as hard as he can to come up with a way out, but he can't find any and wonders if he should call Yiya. However, he's also unsure if that's a good idea since he doesn't know whether Vivian would be able to keep the secret. While lost in thought, the monster behind him gets back up and charges to attack again. But he's so irritated that he turns around furiously, tells the monster not to bother him, and attacks back, launching it far away. A butler appears congratulating him for defeating the Phantom Wolf and informing him that he's earned 1 magic experience point. Lin asks what a Phantom Wolf is. The system replies that the question is outside the ranch's jurisdiction, so he'll have to figure it out on his own. The protagonist gets angry and yells at the butler, saying he can't just leave at a time like this. Suddenly, Vivian. He asks if that's really what he thinks it is. Vivian looks a bit frightened as she sees it approaching, but the protagonist wonders if this is really how it works. That purple thing starts getting closer to Vivian, pulling her a little nearer. The protagonist thinks that every time a thorn breaks, Vivian drops a bit lower, and that each wolf he defeats moves her closer to the safe area where he is. Suddenly, he looks back and sees 2 wolves appear at the same time. He yells that this can't be happening and wonders if every wolf he defeats will automatically split into 2. He starts questioning whether this kind of design is some sort of mechanism until he begins to remember something like this written in the student manual. Third-year students and above can enter a trial realm and have a battle simulation with demonic beasts. The instructor will configure a passing mechanism based on the evaluation content, and once passed, you'll be automatically transported out. The 2 wolves begin to attack. Lin gets ready for combat, annoyed because he didn't read the material thoroughly at the time, so that's all he remembers. And the reason the wolf's name has the word Phantom in front is because this is a trial realm for upperclassmen. He continues fighting the 2 wolves and thinks that, judging by the current mechanism's design, the key to passing this trial is to save Vivian. He defeats 1 wolf and gains another magic experience point. He thinks it's not so bad and decides to keep fighting with everything he has. The wolves keep multiplying and he keeps using everything he has to win. The battle between them doesn't stop for a second, and he steps back thinking he can't keep killing them like this. Each one he kills splits into 2, and he won't be able to handle that many using only the fireball spell. If it keeps going this way, even if he isn't bitten, he'll end up being pushed off the cliff. One of the wolves attacks, and he remembers that when he inherited Yia's magic, besides the fireball, there were 3 other basic spells he could use. The butler appears saying that currently the ranch has only 1 fire dragon, and the rancher's level is 1. Skills: basic magic, shield, bite, claw, fire magic, fireball. The system asks if he wants to proceed with the import. The protagonist activates his shield and manages to block the bite. However, the wolf's bite is very strong and manages to pierce a bit of his. Even though claw can seriously injure the wolves, it still can't solve the biggest problem. The system notifies once again, congratulating him for defeating a phantom wolf and noting that he gained 1 magic experience point. He starts to ask why he got a point of experience since he clearly didn't kill a wolf just now. Looking to the side, he sees a magic cluster floating up from the cliff. With that, he realizes that knocking a wolf down there also activates the mechanism. As soon as he figures that out, he starts laughing and thinks that as long as he can control the numbers, then he has nothing to fear. He activates his magic once more and charges toward the wolves, thinking that now they can all come at once. With Claw, he can hurt and push all the wolves. With the fireball, he throws them off the cliff. Looking to the side, Lin notices that Vivian is coming toward him, and he thinks that apparently he won't need to fight anymore. She grabs him tightly, scared and crying. He tries to calm her down, saying that it's all right now. He kneels down and says they've finished the trial, so they should be teleported out soon. However, the 2 of them hear an extremely loud roar coming from the depths of that place. The protagonist asks what that could be. Even while crying, Vivian starts healing Lin and, with a trembling voice, apologizes and says that as soon as she entered, she was tied up above and could only watch from there, unable to do anything, and that to save her, he had to get hurt a lot. He starts smiling and pats her head, saying that she really likes to apologize. The protagonist says she doesn't need to feel guilty because she also helped him before. And besides, he's not just saving her, he's saving himself. He explains that he thought if she was free, they could leave that trial realm. At no point did he imagine there would be another stage. Lin looks at her and says she's been at the academy longer than him and asks if she knows anything else about the trial realm. Vivian lowers her head, apologizes again, and explains that the trial realm is meant for upperclassmen, so she's not familiar with it either. Lin walks up to her with a smile and says she's apologizing again. He tells her to relax a bit because she doesn't need to blame herself like that. With tears in her eyes, she starts apologizing again but stops, saying she won't do it anymore. The protagonist stands up, saying that if they don't have any information, then all they can do is prepare for the next stage. He says he just killed several wolves and that it might be even more dangerous down below, but she shouldn't worry because he will protect her well. Vivian pushes his hand away and refuses. She takes a green crystal in her hand and says that for the next stage, she wants to fight by his side. Sees them, she runs and hides behind the protagonist. He simply snaps his fingers and manages to defeat both bats. He looks at her and asks if she's really going to fight by his side, and she replies yes, shouting that what just happened was only an accident. The 2 start going down the stairs carefully. Lin asks Vivian if she also feels the mist getting lighter. She says yes and also mentions that it sounds like there's some kind of noise. Out of nowhere, the sound she was hearing happens right next to her. The bridge begins to collapse right behind them. Lin yells for her not to stay there and starts pulling her, saying they need to run. But that wasn't enough. A few seconds later, the bridge under their feet also breaks, and he thinks there's no other way. He gets ready to snap his fingers and asks the butler to release Yiya. At the last second, Vivian starts shouting and casting a spell. "Oh, great wind, your believer prays to you. Grant me wings." With that, she begins to fly and holds the protagonist in her arms. He's surprised and says that she knows wind magic, and that's really amazing. She smiles, saying she studied it for 2 years. The butler appears congratulating the user for completing the task: Bridal Gate, Bridal Phase, Princess Vivian. Rewards: Dragon Egg Fragment plus 20 magic experience. He thinks that not only was he saved, but the system task was also completed by accident, so now he owes her another favor. The butler congratulates him once more for reaching level 3, and the current experience points are 12 out of 200. Since Yiya cares about her new home, she has no intention of learning new skills. There's no draconic magic to inherit with this upgrade. Shortly after, Vivian says they've finally reached the bottom. They begin walking through the place, and suddenly, a very bright light starts to blind them. The protagonist asks if those are oscillating stones. When someone steps on the valley floor, it automatically lights up, and that's very human-like. A path was lit with torches in front of them. Vivian gets excited and points forward, saying there's a portal there. She asks if they're really going to get out now. Lin looks around and sees the bodies of the wolves he defeated earlier and thinks they haven't revived, and the path to the portal isn't blocked either. He continues analyzing the situation and tells her that he doesn't believe the one who set up this trial would be kind enough to let them leave so easily. He asks her to stay behind him because he wants to test something. He throws a stone that bounces across several points along the path, wanting to see if there's another hidden mechanism. Suddenly, the stone hits a point that sinks, and he tells her to be careful. Lin thinks he already knew there would be another mechanism. Vivian looks at him and yells because his leg has a small wound. He tells her not to worry because he's fine, it's just... He gets up and starts to wonder why he was attacked, since it was the stone that triggered the mechanism, not him. Vivian tries to activate her healing magic, but she's so nervous that she can't concentrate enough. She asks the protagonist to look at that sculpture. As soon as he looks, he asks if she really thinks... Suddenly, it transforms into a small wolf. The two are surprised, asking if that's really a wolf pup. Vivian says that the animal is really cute. The protagonist thinks that it looks like Yiya. As soon as the pup wakes up, it looks forward and starts growling, angry because the two were there. The noise was deafening, causing pain in their ears. The wolves that were previously dead now begin to rise again, and the protagonist yells, asking if that little cub can really revive the other wolves. Lin says that if they stop to analyze the situation, all the others were revived by that white pup. So the key to getting out of there for good is that being. The protagonist begins fighting the wolves again and starts defeating them easily. However, every time he defeats one, it's revived. The protagonist thinks this really will never end because he won't be able to find a chance to deal with that wolf pup if he's surrounded by so many wolves all the time. Vivian begins reciting her magic again, saying, "Oh, great wind, your believer prays to you. Turn into a sharp blade and destroy the enemy." An attack shoots from her and quickly heads toward the pup. The protagonist says she's really amazing. However, the pup senses the attack coming and starts growling again, creating a barrier in front of itself that blocks the attack. Both of them are shocked, as they didn't expect it to defend itself. Vivian starts trembling upon seeing that the little pup was able to create an immunity shield. She remembers a merchant fleet so large that only that child returned. People around her used to say they heard it was an encounter with an 8th-ranked demonic beast. The escort team couldn't break through the immunity shield, and when reinforcements arrived, only that child was left alive, hidden under a pile of adult corpses. Remembering that, she starts screaming that they can't fight, and repeats it several times, dropping her magical weapon. She curls up in a corner, saying their magic won't be able to break through that level of immunity shield. Trembling with fear, she asks the protagonist if they're really going to die. Lin keeps fighting and asks what's going on with her since she's completely in shock. He starts getting irritated with the situation and yells that they're not going to die. He starts defeating multiple wolves one after another in seconds and shouts for her not to be afraid because there's definitely a way and he's right there and won't let anything happen to her. That scene she just witnessed starts to clear in her mind and she remembers it happening once before. Someone was in front of her fighting a monster and told her not to be afraid because he was there and wouldn't let anything happen to her. Vivian starts to wonder if this is really happening again. She also questions what she's doing since she had sworn never to hide behind others again. Her conscience starts pressuring her, asking if she's really going to stay there and watch him die once more. She grabs her weapon, trembling in fear, and looks at the protagonist fighting those beasts. She thinks that even if she's the one who dies this time, she'll never go back to being the one who just hides behind others. She starts running, screaming, and lands an extremely powerful blow on a wolf, slamming it into the ground. Lin is surprised and asks if a mage is really using physical attacks. Vivian, still upset and with tears in her eyes, apologizes once more to the protagonist, pointing out that she didn't use anything special just now, and that for now, that's the only way she can fight. Lin tells her again that she doesn't need to apologize. In fact, it's thanks to her that he figured out a way to deal with that shield. Vivian is a bit confused because she didn't expect to hear something like that. Lin explains that he's going to use a fireball to open a path so she can escape the wolves' encirclement. He asks if she can hold on for 30 seconds alone. Confident, she says she'll try. Lin says that's enough and uses her instant fireball, creating an opening for her to pass through. Taking advantage of the fact that the rest of the wolves were focusing on Vivian, he jumps straight at the pup. He grabs onto the structure, thinking that since magical attacks will always be reflected, he'll use his own fist instead. It should work. The protagonist gathers all his strength and attacks. Suddenly, all the wolves begin to fall and the system congratulates him, saying the rancher has defeated a boss-level monster and gained 10x experience points. Rewarded title, Wolf King, can make wolves kneel before you, has 3 opportunities to summon and command a pack. The butler also congratulates him for learning a new skill on his own. 3rd rank technique, Fire Fist. Reward, beginner to master Fire Magic Notebook X1. Lin is surprised and asks if there really was such a reward. Vivian approaches, saying they have to leave quickly because that portal seems to be the right one. The protagonist walks up to the portal and begins to extend his hand to test it. Vivian looks at him and realizes, now that she's calmed down, that his body is completely injured. After testing the portal, Lin says it feels the same as when they first entered, so it must be real. Without showing her face, she says that if she had been more useful, he wouldn't have gotten hurt like that. He scolds her, saying she's apologizing again. She tries to explain, but the protagonist interrupts, saying it's just a small injury and she doesn't need to worry. He takes her hand and, smiling, starts walking through the portal, adding that he truly wants to see the sky with her. The two of them begin to pass through this portal. The system congratulates them for completing the test, saying Vivian received a B- while Lin got an A+. These results will be reported soon. Upon exiting the portal, Lin says something feels strange and questions why his body suddenly feels so relaxed and that all his wounds have vanished. The protagonist assumes the butler secretly helped heal him. However, it was only after reading the student manual that he found out. There are 2 ways to exit. Nike was reading the book to him and says that although the pain feels real, once someone leaves the test, they are unscathed. The protagonist lies on the table and asks why he didn't properly read the student manual before. Still, he gets up and says maybe it was a good thing, because he truly fought for his life. If he hadn't, he might have been eaten by a wolf, and that would have been far more painful. Quickly, the story starts spreading around the school. One student asks his friends if they heard something strange, because last night the talentless rookie completed the 3rd-year student's test dimension. Another student is shocked and asks how that's possible. Freshmen aren't allowed in those places. The first guy says that's true, but people are saying it was a senior in charge of the test dimension, and the teachers are investigating to see what they find. The student yells, asking if that means Lin actually completed the test. The first guy confirms and emphasizes that he even got an A+. And after that incident, the teachers now suspect there was a mistake during the protagonist's entrance exam and are allowing him to retake the test. Inside the Truth Student Union, students are gathered around a magic crystal, waiting for the results to be revealed. They're shocked, asking if someone is messing with them, because in the second test, the protagonist's talent and fire affinity became mid-level. They start questioning how that's possible. Just a day ago, he was a weakling. Augustine sits on his couch drinking, annoyed by all the chatter around him, until he yells at them to stop and stop being so arrogant. He turns, irritated, grabs his coat, and says class is almost over, so they should get ready for patrol. While leaving, he says he'll find a chance to see for himself whether Lin is truly capable. Elsewhere, the protagonist looks around wondering why he suddenly has a sinking feeling. The buyer trying to purchase his potions asks why he's backing away, saying if the offer is too low, they can renegotiate. Lin apologizes and says he just got lost in thought. Still, he offers to sell 15 potion bottles for 20,000 gold coins because the merchant seems honest. The merchant, without hesitation, agrees, saying that's a fair price since the potions are top quality. After the deal, the merchant says goodbye and tells the protagonist he's welcome anytime. They're willing to be the regular distributor of those potions if he's interested. Leaving with his pockets full of money, the protagonist smiles happily, saying he'll consider the offer. He holds his gold coin tightly and says that, judging by how things are going, it seems money won't be a problem. He keeps walking, saying his little one has been waiting for a long time, so when he gets back to the ranch, he'll build a new habitat for him. Later, back at the ranch, the habitat area has been expanded. Yiya is impressed with her new home and starts celebrating, saying her habitat has finally grown. Lin asks how she's doing and questions whether she really lied or not. She says she didn't lie and tells him that she loves him. Because of her bouncing and playing inside the small volcano, the lava nearly hits the protagonist, who steps back screaming and asks if that's her way of showing love. Yiya keeps relaxing inside her new volcano and says that was a small accident. The butler congratulates him once more for upgrading the dragon's nest to medium size. With that, he gains 5 experience points, 200 gold, now totaling 27 out of 200 XP, and unlocks a new area, Dragon Training Field. The system asks if he wants to go there now. Lin is excited about the new training field and Yia asks if it's a new place to have fun. He calls her to take a look and snaps his fingers, asking the butler to teleport them there. While being teleported, the protagonist wonders what the new field will be like. It could be a dangerous flight path or an intense, merciless arena. Either way, he says it must be much bigger than his tiny training room. But once they arrive, they realize it's nothing like that. He asks what they could possibly do on that platform. Yia also gets annoyed, asking if the butler is joking with her. The system appears, asking them not to be impatient, since the more tasks the protagonist completes, the bigger the training field will become. After completing all the tasks, he'll unlock the Dragon God Arena. Lin is enchanted by the name Dragon God Arena. Yia asks what that could be. The butler asks him to complete the first training task, wave the interactive dragon wand 1,000 times. Upon hearing the sound and movement of the wand, Yia becomes amazed and delighted. The protagonist throws the wand to the ground and asks if that's not for cats, wondering if the butler really thinks that changing the word cat to dragon means he's training a dragon. He keeps arguing with the butler, asking why he doesn't give a real task. Yaya, who is excited to play, starts looking at her owner and becomes extremely sad. She turns and says it's okay if he doesn't want to play. Instantly, he remembers being alone in his room, asking when his father would play with him. Lin begins to wonder if the little one is feeling lonely. He figures she probably is, since she's the only dragon on that huge ranch, and he always shows up, then disappears quickly. He starts questioning why he even cares. If there's a purpose to the butler's training, he should just think of it as playing with his little one. He starts waving the wand with the dragon, and the two begin to play. Quickly, his progress begins to rise. However, the protagonist's energy was also running low. He sits on the ground, asking when this will end and whether the training is for him or for Yia. He gathers all his strength and starts waving it as fast and hard as he can. When he reaches 999, Yia looks at him with a different presence. He freezes, wondering what's happening because he can't move his body. Finally, the little dragon manages to grab the wand from his hand, completing the task. The butler appears once again, congratulating him for completing the training task. The fire dragon, Yia, has learned a new skill, Draconic Fear. Lin asks how you even learn that by trying to grab an interactive wand. The butler also informs him that the user's level has increased to 3rd rank, and now he can inherit the 3rd rank magic, Draconic Fear. Using the skill will paralyze any magical beast lower in level than the user, and has a small chance to paralyze one of a higher level. The greater the level difference, the longer the paralysis. He's amazed that he also inherited a new magic skill. Suddenly, several things begin to emerge from the sea. The butler says he's also unlocked the 2nd training task, but that day's training quota has been exhausted. The user is welcome to explore it next time. Lin looks toward the horizon and says he truly understands now. It's true that every time he completes a task, the training field will grow larger. The surface of the water is so vast that he wonders when he'll be able to unlock the Dragon God Arena. Yia calls out to the protagonist and he says he already knows, promising they'll continue playing next time. He pets her and says that in the future he'll play with her more often. However, Yia gets annoyed and slaps him away, asking who gave him permission to touch her belly. The protagonist screams as he's sent flying, saying his affection was wasted. After that, a month passed without any problems. Professor Yisha kept her promise and he was able to join the class. He finally came into contact with the mysteries of magic that were only taught orally. His classmates also became much friendlier, and the people who once mocked him now called him Hyung. The butler also stayed quiet for a long time and didn't give any more missions, making the protagonist think he could study peacefully until the end of the semester. But he didn't expect that while helping Vivian clean the library, he would pull a curtain and say there seemed to be something behind it. As soon as he pulled it back, he saw a large magic circle. Immediately, he shouts that there's no mistake. He recognizes that magical aura as his father's. He reaches his hand toward the circle and it begins to glow. He grows a bit concerned about what's happening and simply disappears. On the other side of the portal, he looks around in surprise and asks what the hell that is, because he sees a chained dragon. However, upon closer inspection, he realizes it's not a dragon, but merely its remains. He begins to wonder why something like that exists in the academy, and why a matrix with his father's residual magic would lead him to a place like that. The butler appears and says the main quest for the water dragon egg, the sleeping dragon's last wish, is now active. The completion conditions are break the chains restraining the dragon's skeleton and help the sleeping dragon move on. Quest difficulty, medium. Reward, water dragon egg fragment, X2. Current fragments, 2 out of 10. Lin keeps looking and says that's just a regular dragon's nest. Magic experience, 50. He creates a flame in his hand and says he'll try it now. He attacks the chain, but nothing happens. He realizes he can't melt the chains. It won't be that easy. He understands that he'll need to figure out the material properties of the chain before trying anything. However, when he steps onto the sanctuary, another magic circle activates, and the dragon comes to life and begins to move. The protagonist is startled and asks if the dragon has become a ghost. The dragon quickly begins to attack him. He activates his shield to defend himself, but one strike shatters the shield effortlessly. The dragon's attack stops just inches from his neck, restrained by the chains. The protagonist watches and tries to get as far away as possible, saying, "Thank God the chains are limiting the creature's movements." However, that also means that if he breaks the chains, he'd be torn to pieces in seconds. The butler then tells him not to worry, as he would never do anything that would harm the user. Suddenly, the protagonist begins to hear a strange language saying, "Child, my child." At that moment, he realizes it's draconic language. The chained dragon keeps saying they must return his child. Lin starts looking at the skeleton, wondering if it's really the one speaking. He thinks he can understand draconic because of the butler. The skeleton keeps pleading for them to return his child. Lin asks the system if it's because the dragon had its bones and flesh stolen before dying, and if that's why it can't move on. The butler replies that this matter is outside the ranch's jurisdiction, and he must find out on his own. The protagonist gets irritated and throws the butler away, saying that every time he asks something, the answer is always the same, and questions how useless that can be. He thinks that if he can understand Draconic, it must mean the dragon can understand his words too. The dragon keeps repeating that it wants its child. Lin asks why it's chained there and what happened to its child. He says that if the dragon can explain a bit better, maybe he can help somehow. However, the dragon just keeps repeating, "Return my child." The protagonist becomes a little disappointed and starts wondering if there's any way to communicate with it. He begins looking around for clues about what may have happened there until he spots a grimoire on a table. But the book has no title. He starts wiping it clean, wondering if it might contain any useful information. As soon as he opens it, some illusions appear in front of him. Oliver is telling Zoe to believe in him, because even if they weren't acknowledged by their peers in the modern age, their research would certainly go down in history. The protagonist starts shouting for his father and uncle. He keeps looking at the book, now realizing that the place might have been their lab. However, all the pages in the book are blank. Lin starts thinking that maybe the book that helped him awaken the Dragon Ranch was the result of that experiment. He thinks dragons are evil and should be killed. However, he wonders if his father let the dragon go because he didn't agree with humans experimenting on dragons. Lin starts to get confused. If that were the case, his father should be on the opposite side of his uncle. He remembers when he was a child and Oliver told him there was something different about his father's situation, and that when Lin became a sage-ranked mage, he would tell him how to clear the family's name. Lin starts questioning why his uncle wants to help him so much. Lost in thought, he hits his head, saying he can't think about that right now. He turns and begins to leave the room, saying that even if he finds an answer, it proves nothing, since that book is just an empty grimoire left there by someone unknown. And that's exactly why he won't find any new clues there. He begins to pass through the portal, saying he needs to investigate more outside, because out there he can definitely discover more things and complete this task. Shortly after, the protagonist calls Vivian and asks her to place her hand on the wall, asking if she feels anything. She looks at him and says she can feel the spider web he didn't clean properly. Later, Shua appears and tells the protagonist that he asked around, but there don't seem to be any legends about dragons inside the academy. Lin takes a deep breath and decides to talk to his professor. When he gets there, a bit shy, he asks if there were ever any experiments related to dragons in that academy. Yisha looks at him and asks why he would think that. Dragons are such terrifying creatures. How could they be brought into an academy? Lin feels a bit confused, as her expression upon hearing the question seemed suspicious. The professor continues talking and asks why, instead of being curious about something so unnecessary, he doesn't focus more on his studies. She says that, given his excellent performance in the 5th trial realm, the academy has arranged an extra test for him before the final exam. Lin asks what she means and if he really has to do something extra. She says yes and explains that if he manages to pass this extra test, he'll be able to skip 2 years of study and also gain qualification to enter the Mage Trials Tower. She explains that the trial realm he cleared was modeled after the Mage Trials Tower, which is the hardest trial realm in the academy. The protagonist is surprised by that. The Mage Trials Tower is the masterpiece of Chancellor Gladstone, the academy's only sage-ranked mage. However, it contains more dangerous mechanisms, fiercer demonic beasts, and each floor becomes harder as one progresses. Only recognized students are allowed to enter the tower to test their limits. Those who perform well receive several special rewards, such as a Medal of Honor. Lin says he's heard about that medal before. The professor continues explaining and says that every time the trial tower is opened, the king of the Orandi Empire personally attends. The protagonist is surprised and asks if the king really shows up there. Yisha says yes, and that the Medal of Honor is personally awarded by the king. Students who receive the Medal of Honor have the same authority as teachers within the academy and can even study in the Imperial Library. She points out that this way, he'll be able to find information he can't access within the academy. Lin is shocked and wonders if Miss Yisha is actually giving him a hint, because the information not found in the academy might be exactly what he's looking for. Immediately, he gets excited and tells his professor that he'll take the extra test and asks if he can know more details. Yisha shouts that he must defeat her before the final exam. The protagonist looks at her, realizing she's a 6th-rank mage, That makes him uncomfortable, and he starts thinking it must be some kind of joke. How could a third-rank student defeat a sixth-rank professor? He keeps thinking the academy could have just told him directly that he's not allowed into the tower. Yisha steps closer and says that during the battle she'll suppress her power to match his current level. He says she should have mentioned that earlier. Still, she touches his shoulder and explains there's half a month left before the extra test and says she's looking forward to seeing how he performs. The butler also appears, saying the Water Dragon Egg Quest has been activated. He must qualify to enter the Mage Trials Tower. Victory conditions: defeat third-rank Professor Yisha without using draconic magic. Quest difficulty low. Rewards: 1 Water Dragon Egg Fragment and 30 magic experience points. Lin freezes, wondering how he's going to fight without using draconic magic. He starts thinking that a third rank versus another third rank might seem fair on the surface, but the professor's understanding and control of magic are far beyond what a beginner like him could achieve, especially a water-specialized professor whose magic would counter his. However, in magic, it's not just about attributes but also skills. So his only chance to win is to learn new skills before the extra test, skills that Professor Yisha won't anticipate. That way, he might be able to counter her water magic. The protagonist starts studying like crazy to learn more. Using the reward notebook from the butler, he keeps training non-stop and even recites new incantations like Spirit of Fire resounding between heaven and earth, please hear me. But he begins to think that blindly studying won't be enough. He also starts sparring with Yia, but ends up getting hit and almost roasted alive. The little dragon laughs and asks if she's not amazing. The protagonist asks if she's trying to kill him. Still, he keeps training with her, thinking he needs more combat experience. Over time, he starts dodging Yia's attacks. He thinks that even though training and fighting every day is exhausting, he's felt a significant improvement in both his magic skills and his bond with Yia. In that brief moment, he begins to feel fulfilled and happy as he continues preparing for the extra test. As time passes, the day of the test finally arrives. The two are already in the arena, and many people begin gathering around. Some students comment that the protagonist only reached third rank half a semester ago and is already bold enough to fight Professor Yisha. People start whispering that no first-year student has ever had the chance to enter the Mage Trials Tower. So how is Lin, with only mid-level talent, going to be the first? They say he'd better lose quickly so that boring registration tasks can be finished and preparations for the trial tower can begin. Vivian gets irritated, saying that kid shouldn't say such things because student Lin is amazing. Shua is also annoyed and says that if the protagonist loses, he'll eat his own hat. The professor announces they're starting and explains that the first to be hit by magic or knocked out of the circle will be declared the loser. Both begin casting their spells and the battle begins. The protagonist uses the multiple fireball technique, while the professor uses the multiple water ball technique. With that, she completely nullified his attack. However, Lin thinks that his professor summoned twice as much as he did, which was already expected from a 6th rank mage. Even though she suppressed her power, she's still extremely strong. Yisha scolds him, saying he shouldn't act so hastily since he hasn't learned wind magic yet. She then begins using the Furious Silver Serpent dance. The protagonist thinks this is really bad and uses the Ring of Fire. With the Ring of Fire circling, he managed to interrupt her attack and save himself. The professor is impressed and asks if he really used the Ring of Fire to vaporize her water serpent. Shua shouts from the crowd, saying he's truly amazing. Lin thinks that attack came way too close. Yisha admits that the protagonist's understanding of formulas and skills is far beyond that of his peers. However, facing power that can't be overcome with tricks is what she wants to see if he can handle. She uses another attack called Third Rank Torrent. Lin immediately counters with Third Rank Fire Spring. The two attacks collide mid-air. People comment that Lin's Fire Spring is being pushed back and wonder what he was thinking, trying to go head-to-head with a much stronger professor using his own magic. Yisha tells him that clashing directly with her isn't a smart move, but he remains silent, staring at her. Suddenly, she's surprised, thinking there's no way he could have done that, because the flames didn't rise up through her water column. She realizes it was the protagonist who controlled them to go up. The fireballs begin to gather around her, making her wonder if he's truly capable of controlling the fire element so skillfully. Lin smiles and says that thanks to her, he had time to prepare that spell. He begins casting his magic again, saying, "O spirits of fire, resounding between heaven and earth, please answer my call and let the meteor fire fall." Countless fireballs are immediately created and fired at the professor. Yisha starts thinking that Lin hasn't just become a third-rank mage, but also learned the art of meteor fire, which is nearly impossible for someone at his level. With that, she admits the protagonist has grown beyond her expectations. A massive explosion erupts in the arena. Vivian and the dog ask if Lin managed to win, but another student says there's no way that happened. How could the professor be defeated like that? As all the smoke begins to clear, the professor appears using a third-rank spell, Night Blossom Illusion. She surrounded herself in a ball of water, preventing all the flames from hitting her. Vivian was impressed by the teacher's strength. The other spectators comment that even fish are swimming in that water, highlighting that the illusion actually contains a real river. A student analyzing the fight says he heard that only those who have made a contract with the water spirit of a certain river can use that magic. Even though it looks like a shield, it's a small kind of teleportation. Besides teleporting the magic shot to the river, she also redirects the river back to the battlefield. The protagonist asks his opponent if that is really a third-rank spell. She tries to brush it off, saying she thinks she's still using third-rank power, but changes the subject and tells him to quickly think of a way to counterattack, as her spell is almost complete and once it's ready, the entire arena will be swallowed by water. Lin is surprised and sees the water approaching him. He starts thinking that he just heard the spell can transfer magical attacks to the river. So, if magical attacks aren't effective, it's basically the same as the White Wolf's shield. He starts wondering if it's only immune to magic. He begins to advance, thinking that if the fight has reached this point, then his last bet will be that. He gathers flames in his hand and goes for a physical attack, catching the teacher by surprise. She wonders how he figured out that method so quickly. With the physical attack, he manages to break through the water barrier she created and starts chanting his flame summon again, asking it to dance fiercely like a serpent. The attack goes toward the teacher, who responds with her waterfall magic. Her spell manages to contain his and hits him hard, slamming him against the wall, separating the arena from the stands. Vivian, beside him on the ground, asks the protagonist if he had just won. So why did that suddenly happen? Shua is confused, asking if their boss lost. However, the teacher intervenes and says that's not what happened. In fact, she was the one who was defeated, admitting she had to break the third-level restriction to defeat the protagonist. She explains that during their battle, she ended up unconsciously seeing him as a true opponent. She turns and starts leaving the arena, wondering aloud what kind of terrifying level he'll reach in the future, as she's truly looking forward to seeing it. Vivian and the dog begin celebrating, and the butler appears to congratulate him, saying that he defeated Yisha and thus completed the main task, gaining dragon egg fragments and magical experience. The king of the Orange Empire, named Levi III, was also watching the match. The protagonist looks at him and realizes he really is there. The king begins to speak and says that everyone is about to enter the Tower of Challenges, as they are not only the elite of the Sacred Iris, but also the future pillars of the Empire. He emphasizes that the Medal of Honor will be awarded to the one who completes the Tower of Challenges first. He raises his hand and shouts for everyone to show what they're capable of. They begin organizing the students, asking them to form a single line to enter the magical tower. Some female students comment that they didn't think the protagonist would get permission to enter the challenge's magic tower, assuming the teacher must have gone easy on him. The same student who is analyzing the entire fight gets irritated by those comments and asks if the student union only knows how to gossip. He emphasizes that he was there as a witness during Lin's fight and that Lin won with his real skills. The girl also gets irritated and says maybe he too was bought off by the protagonist. They begin to argue, and other students ask them to calm down and not fight in front of the magic tower. Another girl at the end of the line observes and asks if the man at the front of the line is the protagonist. The same girl from before points her finger at him and says she doesn't know what he used to fool everyone, but his act will end, because the president of the student union already told everyone that he himself will test Lin's abilities. Seeing this, the protagonist starts thinking about Augustine, and the girl asks if he got scared. However, the protagonist was just thinking that he still has a task to complete, but doesn't know if he's ready to defeat Augustine. Suddenly, the butler appears and announces that the previous task of defeating Augustine in the Tower of Magical Challenges hasn't been completed, and advises the user not to start the next challenge. Lin is confused, asking why the previous task hasn't been completed, as he thought qualifying to enter the Magic Tower would be enough. However, this means there might be other tasks inside the tower. While he was lost in thought, one of the supervisors called out to him, saying he was the only one left, except for the protagonist. He apologizes and begins entering the Magic Tower. The king announces that all students have entered and the challenge must now begin. As soon as Lin crosses the portal, he's impressed and asks if that's really the Tower of Magic Challenge, because compared to the Kingdom of Challenges, this feels like an entirely different world. This is the first floor of the Magic Challenge Tower. He notes that it's truly a place meant for veterans in the top 10 strongest. He pulls out the map in his hand and says that before entering, the teacher gave him a map since the tower has a total of 9 floors. Teleport points can be found on the map. On the first 3 floors, each teleport point is protected by magical beasts. Looking at the map, he notices there are many teleport points on the first floor. He starts moving, thinking that being killed by magical beasts or defeated by another student in a magical duel counts as elimination. He continues advancing as fast as he can, since he doesn't know how strong the other students or beasts are, so it's better to run. His strategy is to distance himself from the largest group and head straight to the nearest teleport point. Along the way, he encounters a few magical beasts but defeats them easily. The system congratulates him for defeating a 3rd-rank magical beast, the Dark Knight Leopard. With that, he gains an experience point. He begins breathing heavily and says he finally reached the 3rd floor rather quickly, but the beast level hasn't changed since the 1st floor. He steps into the teleport circle, saying that if his calculations are right, the next floor should have 4th-rank magical beasts. He notes that the higher up the tower, the fewer teleport points there are. That means that going forward, the chances of encountering others increase, so he'll need to be careful. He finally reaches the 4th floor and someone hidden, holding a magic potion, says they finally found him. Meanwhile, outside, the king watches the Tower of Mage Judgment. Yisha also watches. She thinks that although His Majesty comes every year to watch the battle, what happens inside can't actually be seen from outside. The only thing they can do is observe student movement by the lanterns hanging outside the tower. Suddenly, the lantern on the 4th floor lights up, and she's surprised, thinking someone has already reached the 4th floor. The Judgment Tower is divided into 9 floors. The last 3 floors are mechanism rooms, where students face magical beasts from rank 7 to 9, far above their current level. The middle 3 floors are task phases. Only those who complete the tasks can advance. That's where half of the students will be eliminated. On the first 3 floors, students only need to defeat the beasts guarding the teleport points to advance. Only a few are eliminated there. Teams, betrayals, fights over positions. In the end, only 10 people can pass. You could say the real challenge begins on the 4th floor. She begins to wonder how far the protagonist can go. Back on the 4th floor, a system screen appears for Lin saying, "Conditions to clear, obtain 1,000 points before all the animals are killed. Point rules, each beast killed equals sign plus 200 points. Each student eliminated equals sign minus 1,000 points." The protagonist is shocked to learn that eliminating a student deducts so many points. It means there will hardly be any infighting at that level. There are a total of 1,000 beasts for 100 people, so each person can kill 10. But he keeps analyzing and realizes that's not all. The clear condition is exaggerated. Get 1,000 points before all the beasts are killed. So even if there's no visible infighting, the moment a student kills a beast, someone else will definitely not get enough points and be eliminated. Realizing this, he starts running, saying he needs to get ahead of everyone. However, the hidden person was just waiting for an opportunity, and as soon as the protagonist passes by, they throw the flask, saying he must change. But the protagonist notices it in time and uses a fireball to preempt the attack, destroying the flask midair. He's confused, thinking, eliminating students deducts points, so why am I being attacked? He looks at the person who attacked him but realizes he has no time to waste on that and keeps moving forward. The attacker begins laughing and says he's finally been marked. 10 minutes earlier, Augustine and his team were gathered in a part of the 4th floor. He said that apparently the 4th floor wasn't suitable for fighting other students, so he'd have to wait until the 5th floor to confront the protagonist. One of the members grew irritated, saying he couldn't understand why their leader had to stoop to that level to compete with someone like that. If the leader had that much free time, then the 2 of them should fight instead. The young man shouted at the president, saying he was already in 4th place and questioned whether he didn't already have the qualifications to challenge him. Augustine looked at him and said he was still too weak, but the student didn't give up, because his leader had promised him that if he got more points than Lin while on the 4th floor, then the 2 would duel once they reached the 5th floor. He started yelling that that's exactly why he won't let the protagonist get a single point. Meanwhile, Lin kept advancing until he finally spotted one of the magical beasts. He got ready to attack, saying this time he would beat the other students. However, before he could even launch a small attack, other students surrounded the magical beast and attacked it with everything they had. He grew frustrated, saying this had already happened more than 10 times. Every time he found a beast, someone else immediately attacked it, and he couldn't understand what kind of coincidence this was. Only 89 magical beasts remained, and he had 0 points. He kept moving forward, saying he was running out of time. Along the way, he heard some people laughing, saying the points were theirs again. One of the guys laughed, saying he had already gotten his 1,000 points. The other 2 were confused, saying they were also ordered to chase the protagonist, so they didn't understand how he was lucky enough to get 1,000 points. And if they kept wasting time chasing the protagonist, they wouldn't earn enough points to pass either. Suddenly, Lin lunged at Alan, threw him to the ground, and asked what that comment meant about chasing him. The other 2 who were standing prepared to fight, asking if the protagonist was crazy for attacking their team alone. However, Lin looked back and smiled, saying veterans were more than welcome to attack him if they wanted to lose 1,000 points from their total score. The 2 decided to back down. Lin kept holding Alan and said that, on the other hand, he didn't care if Alan didn't want to talk. Either way, he wouldn't earn enough points to pass. So they should fight each other to the death, right there and now. Alan began to panic, saying he didn't want that, as he had just barely earned his points and didn't want to be eliminated. Terrified of being disqualified, he shouted that it was Saren who told them to do it. If they didn't, he'd break their bones once they left the tower. Lin was confused and asked who that person was, but they said they didn't know what the protagonist had done to offend him. They pointed out that Lin had been so focused on looking for magical beasts that he hadn't noticed the air, and that if he just lifted his head a bit, he'd see an arrow pointing directly at him, saying, "Lin is right here." The protagonist was surprised and said now it all made sense. That's why people were always ahead of him, no matter where he went. Suddenly, he remembered the red powder and realized it was used in that earlier attack. He stood up, extremely angry with the situation, and Alan said the number of beasts had dropped too fast, asking if the protagonist still planned to keep going, because even if they didn't interfere anymore, others would keep tracking him, so it was too late to get 1,000 points. Lin tried to destroy the mark with a fireball, but it remained. Alan told him not to waste energy. Those markings couldn't be erased. Saren kept watching from afar, saying that as long as the mark remained, his lackeys would always be one step ahead of the protagonist, taking the magical beasts he could be getting. He emphasized that Lin wouldn't get a single point and should forget it. But then he was shocked by what he saw. Another arrow appeared and he wondered why there were 2 markings. Lin began moving fast, saying if they wanted to mark him, then fine. He could easily imitate hundreds of those marks to confuse them. He started using his fire ability to create countless other markings, leaving Saren unsure of what to do. Seeing no other choice, Saren began hunting magical beasts himself, since there were still 29 left. He pointed out that there were very few magical beasts remaining and refused to believe the protagonist would manage to get his 1,000 points to pass. The other students start succeeding one after another. Lin keeps moving forward as only 8 magical beasts remain and he has a total of 600 points. He says he's almost there and continues searching. He just needs 2 more beasts. However, the system shows that only 1 beast remains, and this leaves him frozen. He punches a nearby rock in frustration because even if he defeats the last one, he still won't have enough points. But then he looks to the side and sees a new system window appear saying, since only 1 magical beast remains for the current floor's hunting task, the desperate attack effect has been activated. The student who defeats the last magical beast will receive a reward package. The package will randomly grant between 0 and 999 points when opened. Time limit to complete the task, 1 hour. Please participate actively in this hunting task if your points are insufficient to complete the current objective. Lin becomes extremely happy upon seeing that he still has a chance and charges forward with everything he's got. Other students also keep searching for the beast, but none of them manage to find it, as it hides very well. They comment that it was expected to be hard to find, but they don't care and decide to head to the central teleportation circle and rest a bit. Meanwhile, at the central teleportation circle, Augustine was already there with some of his team members. A woman asked the president if Saren isn't going too far this time, because if they use tactics like that against a first-year freshman, their council's credibility will be damaged. Augustine asks if she's seriously saying he went too far because the tower is a place that only allows the strong. If Lin can't even handle small fish like Saren, then he's not worth his time. The protagonist keeps advancing as fast as possible, but he notices there are only 15 minutes left and at this rate, he won't make it. He asks the butler to activate his Wolf King title, a skill earned after defeating the lesser White Wolf during the 5th challenge. This skill allows the user to summon and command a pack of magical wolves. The protagonist gathers a pack around him and says their target is a 4th-class fire beast, and their mission is to find it for him. With that, he gives the order and the wolves charge ahead. The other students are startled, asking where so many wolves came from. Another one comments in surprise that those are summoned beasts. Alan observes the number of wolves and says he doesn't know anyone in their class who can summon that many. Another student suggests maybe it's because time is almost up, so the tower itself released the wolves to give them a chance. Suddenly, a howl is heard and the students start running toward the sound, saying maybe they found something. Seeing how fierce the race to get there is, the protagonist asks the butler to use the teleportation matrix item. Lin is teleported to a location and suddenly hears someone behind him, saying they're really impressed he's using such a valuable item there. And apparently he's not afraid to spend money during the challenge. Lin is surprised to see that someone got there before him. He turns around, irritated, saying that person must be Saren. Lin asks if he's already defeated the last beast. Saren tells him not to be so scared because when the wolves howled for the protagonist, he just happened to be nearby. However, it seems the last magical beast is inside the volcano. The other students start arriving, saying they can't believe it, and that's why no one could find it in time. Saren keeps mocking him, telling the protagonist to just give up and admit it. He may have conspired against Lin on this floor, but all is fair in war. He points out that this is actually a good lesson for Lin to witness firsthand the savagery of human nature. Lin asks if he really expects a thank you for that. Saren smiles and asks if he's not happy with the result. But then Lin jumps into the volcano, leaving him shocked. He asks what's going through the protagonist's head to do that. But Lin states that losing like this isn't fair and no one would be happy with that. A countdown appears saying there are only 2 minutes left. He dodges a strong flame heading his way and thinks that while he's inside the Tower of Challenge, he won't die, even if seriously injured. He keeps pushing forward, breaking through anything in his way, thinking he wants to see how far he can go. But the temperature starts rising extremely fast, and the place becomes unbearably hot. He thinks that if he hadn't gained fire magic immunity from Yia, his lungs would probably already be completely dried out. Suddenly, something grabs him. He begins to get caught in a spider web, and no matter how hard he tries to break free, he realizes it's incredibly strong. A giant spider starts approaching, and he's shocked, realizing that the last magical beast, the one hiding inside the volcano, is that massive monster now standing right in front of him. He starts yelling that he's going to become that thing's next meal. Lin begins using his fire magic, saying he needs to burn those webs as fast as possible so he can fight. However, his fire magic does nothing. The monster keeps approaching and attacks, piercing both his legs, causing him to scream in pain. The system appears and states that this is a fourth-class creature, the fire spectral spider, a giant spider that lives in the crater of a volcano. Its golden silk is extremely resistant to heat sources. Not even flowing lava can burn it. It enjoys torturing its prey until they can no longer fight, then devours them slowly. Lin asks if the system couldn't have shared this extremely important info earlier. Suddenly, the spider attacks again, piercing his hand. He starts getting angry, thinking he can't afford to lose focus. He notes that even though he can't destroy the web and is immobilized, he can still cast magic. He begins casting a spell, but the spider attacks him 3 more times, stabbing his body again. Even in extreme pain and on the brink of defeat, he continues chanting with all his remaining strength. Several fireballs begin forming around them, hitting the spider with everything, but it hides inside its carapace, which makes the protagonist even angrier, asking if it really is such a coward that it'll just hide like that. He tries to free himself again, saying that if he weren't stuck in that damned web, he could use his fist to break that shell. Suddenly, he sees the remaining time is under a minute and panics, realizing he's running out of time. From this, he concludes that there's really no other way. He suddenly notices the spider's eyes are exposed. If he can see its eyes, that means the shell doesn't cover the entire body. So, if he can use the fire serpent spell to penetrate its defenses, he might have a chance. With difficulty, he manages to free one hand and begins casting his spell, but then he feels a tremor and intense pressure, making him think the volcano is about to erupt. The spider shoots more webbing, covering the protagonist's mouth and preventing him from casting spells. The butler warns that flame spiders enjoy consuming prey that has been burned by magma from active volcanoes. Lin gets even more frustrated, asking if that's why the spider stayed there for so long, and questions again why the butler couldn't have warned him earlier. Because if the volcano hadn't erupted at that exact moment, maybe he could have won. The spider prepares to strike him as the volcano awakens, spewing magma everywhere. From afar, the student union is monitoring the situation. Saren starts laughing, saying he had already warned that a bastard like that couldn't be a rival to his master. He turns and says the president should come with him, since they have a duel on the next floor. However, Augustin asks if they really think they can leave, and reminds him that it's good. He hasn't forgotten the current mission still isn't over. Saren comments that his master's tongue is sharp as ever, noting that there are only a few seconds left, and questions whether the president really thinks the protagonist will survive that. The remaining time is just 30 seconds. Lin gathers all his strength and punches the spider in the jaw, shattering its fangs. The butler appears, congratulating the farmer for completing the special achievement, Baptism of Fire. Amid the flames and magma, the protagonist stands as if nothing affects him, thanks to the fire magic immunity effect. His own body was forced to endure the molten lava, now granting him physical resistance similar to the flame dragon Yiya. From now on, this resistance will grow as Yaya's level increases. Normal physical attacks can no longer injure him. Lin looks at his body and says it's truly amazing. Even his wounds healed instantly. He looks to the side and comments that apparently there's not much time left, as only 4 seconds remain. The spider tries to flee, but he stares it down and asks where it thinks it's going. He casts his magic again, summoning the fire serpent, and strikes the spider with full force, with only 1 second left on the timer. With that, the time runs out. Saren keeps laughing, saying it's over, and asks the president what he thinks of that, emphasizing that he had said the protagonist would be eliminated. Augustine turns away disappointed, as he truly believed that Guy hadn't survived. Suddenly, people begin shouting for them to look at the sky. Something is moving. Augustine is stunned, thinking it might be him. He looks back and sees that the mark placed on Lin is moving rapidly toward them. That means he's still alive. Saren gets annoyed and asks why everyone is so shocked. Being alive means nothing. Even if he is, he'll still be disqualified if he wasn't able to defeat the last magical beast. Suddenly, the protagonist appears behind them, asking for permission to pass, saying he brought the reward orb in his hands. Saren can't believe what he's seeing. The others are amazed, asking how he managed that and how many points it's worth, telling him to open it right away. He says he will, but first asks if any kind soul would lend him some clothes. A girl hands him some clothes, and the protagonist thanks her. She says it's no trouble at all, pointing out that her miniaturization potions are incredible. Besides school uniforms, she can carry all sorts of things. She walks up to him and says, to be honest, she's been tracking his progress since he entered the tower, as rumors are spreading that he's a rising genius. A genius being compared to Augustine. She smiles, introduces herself as Dia, and asks if he'd like to form a team with her in the next floor if he passes. Lin feels a bit confused, thinking the situation is strange, since that girl is his senior. However, her smile is strikingly similar to Vivian's, and he wonders if it's just because they're both beautiful. Alan then comes running, saying the protagonist can count on him too, since the next floor has 5th-rank magical beasts, and they won't be able to handle them alone. He adds that on the current floor, he was tricked by evildoers and end up unintentionally getting in the protagonist's way, so now he's willing to lick his boots to make up for it on the next floor. Lin starts pushing him away, asking him to back off a bit, but Alan keeps begging for a chance. Saren approaches and says they might be talking about the next floor too soon. He points out that even if the protagonist was lucky enough to defeat the beast, if the reward orb doesn't grant him 400 points, then he's done for. Everyone tells him to open it right away to see what's inside. The system informs that he must break the golden orb to reveal the score. Lin holds it with both hands, focuses, and asks that the points inside be enough. He slowly opens the orb. As soon as he does, he's congratulated for earning 399 points. However, he's extremely frustrated, saying he needed just one more point. Saren bursts out laughing in his face. The system appears, saying that the 4th floor test of the Mage Challenge Tower has ended. Students who reached a total of 1,000 points during the test will be sent to the 5th floor. Those who fail to reach that score will be eliminated from the trial and sent outside the tower. Please prepare to be teleported. Saren keeps mocking him, saying he deserved it. No one told him to think he could steal the chance to fight the president. Daya scolds him, calling him trash for celebrating such an empty victory. Lin lowers his head and tells his senior to let it go. Upset by the situation, he thinks that he already struggled enough just to survive back there, so he'll leave without regrets. With that, people are teleported to the 5th floor of the Mage Challenge Tower. At the central teleportation circle, people start cheering, as the protagonist also appears there. They note that apparently, he wasn't eliminated. The other students find it very strange, since all the eliminated ones were already sent away, yet Lin is still there and wasn't removed with them. They start wondering if it's because he was the only one to complete the final mission of the 4th floor. Some people begin getting irritated, asking if that means advancing to the next floor can also depend on merit. However, that clearly goes against the tower's rules, making them question if the rules are just for show. Saren storms over to him in a rage, shouting and demanding to know what kind of cheating he's using. However, Lin is completely lost, not understanding what's happening. He even wonders if the butler might have cheated on his behalf without him knowing. Saren keeps going, saying that with how weak the protagonist is, he can't understand how he managed to jump into a volcano and then come out unharmed. And on top of all that, still kill the final beast. He questions if that's when all the trickery began and keeps pressing for Lin to confess what's really going on. Daya steps in, slaps Saren's hand and says, "It's time to stop with all this nonsense." She tells him to quit spouting garbage and actually look at the rules instead of shouting like an idiot for everyone to hear. Saren, confused, asks what the rules have to do with anything. Alan points out that it's exactly that. The challenge tower itself allowed Lin to advance, so he never cheated. The system then announces that the 5th floor of the Mage Challenge Tower is beginning, and the win condition is a duel between 2 teams. The winner will take all of the other team's points. The students start panicking, realizing that if a tournament is happening, that means half the participants will be eliminated. The system continues and explains that participants must confirm their duels using identification cards. These ID cards can be obtained by hunting magical beasts. Students without cards cannot challenge or eliminate others. Whoever has cards will have the advantage. The system goes on, stating that for each beast defeated, 200 points will be subtracted. For attacks against students without cards, 1,000 points will be deducted. Anyone with a negative score will be automatically eliminated. If the negative score results from attacking a player without a card, that player will automatically advance to the next floor. Remaining beasts, 500. Students, 70. The students are shaken, saying they only have 1,000 points, and that every magical beast defeated deducts 200. That means they can only attempt to move on 5 times. Descriptions appear stating that the target for elimination will be randomly chosen due to the need for an even number of participants. Lin, the student with the highest score under 1,000, was included to make up for the missing player. Saren becomes completely furious, saying that's why he advanced. The protagonist celebrates, saying he really didn't waste his time in that hellish volcano. He walks over to his senior and says they can officially form a team. She agrees without hesitation and asks what they'll do about that other person. Alan grabs the protagonist's leg again, saying he'd even serve as a shield if he could just come along. Lin starts shaking his leg, shouting for him to let go, but Alan clings tightly, saying he won't let go even if he dies, that he'll hold on forever. Daya is impressed by his determination. Meanwhile, a tentacle starts approaching them. The 3 of them sense something strange and look back, but nothing is there. Daya asks if he saw anything. The protagonist says it felt like something was floating nearby, but it was probably just his imagination. She says most of the teams have already started searching, so they better hurry or they'll fall behind. He tells Alan that if he wants to follow them, that's fine, but the distribution of ID cards will depend on each person's effort, so if he doesn't pull his weight, he'll be the last to get one. Alan is happy with that, saying that as long as he can follow his new master, he doesn't care about the details. He adds that he knows the protagonist will be fine, so if he can do it, Alan can too. Lin starts getting irritated, telling Alan to stop rubbing his face against his legs. Daya starts laughing at the scene, saying the 2 of them are hilarious. Meanwhile, the same tentacle starts appearing again. Outside, His Majesty is informed that, according to the external observation post of the Challenge Tower, all participants have now reached the 5th floor. The king is surprised, saying that in previous years, nearly half the students had been eliminated by this stage. That means this year's participants are truly impressive, and it looks like he'll have to prepare more prizes. The teacher is still standing, watching closely. She thinks it's not quite like that, because even if the students this year are indeed of higher quality than previous ones, and the rules have changed, it's virtually impossible that no one has been eliminated yet. That's why she has a bad feeling about all of this. Back in the tower, Daya begins attacking and says that based on her field combat experience, the harder a beast is to defeat, the greater the chance of it dropping valuable items. Besides, their individual scores aren't very high. Together, they'd only have 14 chances, so they need to choose their targets wisely. The protagonist strikes a rock hard. The three of them stand there, staring, since they still haven't obtained their ID cards. Daya has 200 points remaining, Alan also has 200 points, and the protagonist has 399 points. Daya crouches down, slightly disheartened, and says each of them has only one chance. Alan gets frustrated too and punches a tree, saying the drop rate is extremely low. Lin asks if the chance of getting an ID card really depends solely on luck. Such an important item needed to advance? While he's thinking about that, something grabs him by the waist and quickly ensnares the other two as well. Alan yells that it's a 3rd-rank beast, the man-eating plant. He's confused, saying the 5th floor should only have 5th-rank beasts, so why is that thing here? Lin notes that he was so lost in thought he didn't even notice it approaching. He says the creature isn't complicated to understand, but once it chooses and marks its prey, it immediately calls for reinforcements and won't stop until its target is dead. If caught by one of them, it's best to fight with everything you've got to escape as quickly as possible. He looks to the side and sees that no one is moving a muscle to fight back. He realizes that's because everyone knows a beast of that rank won't drop an ID card. Seeing no way out, he figures he still has 399 points, so he won't be eliminated right away. But he also won't be able to kill another magical beast with the points he has left. He wonders if it's really worth risking everything to save his companions. However, he remembers how they stood up for him when Saren accused him of cheating. He starts to smile and makes a decision. Casting his fire spell, the other two ask what he's doing. His attack is blocked by a water barrier. Lin looks at his companion Alan and asks what he's doing and why. Alan gets angry and shouts at the protagonist, saying he's so sly, and asks why he acted like that. Lin is confused by these words, but Alan keeps yelling, saying Lin didn't realize that no one there wanted to fight, because they all wanted to sacrifice someone else to save themselves. And that's why he chose to step up and save the team. That's why seeing Lin act like that is so frustrating. He turns away and admits he's a selfish and cowardly person, someone who never dared to step forward when something happened. But even he can't keep living like that anymore. He starts gathering his magic and shouts that he no longer wants to live with guilt. He says the protagonist accepted him even after all the trouble he caused on the previous floor, so how could he go on living with that guilt? He begins reciting his spell. However, he's interrupted when Dia throws one of her vials, saying that it's just a 3rd-rank creature, so why are they making such a fuss? Alan gets annoyed and says she stole all his hard work. She replies that both of them are way too serious, so she won't do it again. Then she asks how she can become their best friend after they leave the tower. Hearing those words, the protagonist freezes, thinking about what she said about being best friends. However, the three of them begin to feel the roots binding them squeeze tighter. Alan asks her, if she didn't kill the real man-eating plant, then why is this happening? Daya replies that she's not sure either. Her points weren't deducted, so the potion she threw earlier wasn't enough to defeat the monster. She's shocked and says that maybe that monster isn't a real man-eater, but rather a disguised 5th-rank monster, the puppet tree. She explains that usually when encountering man-eating vines, they react instantly and aggressively, but the vines of the puppet tree tighten more and more the victim struggles, luring prey with the appearance of normal vines until death. Alan gets angry and says he's never seen such a despicable tree. The protagonist asks how they're supposed to deal with something like that. Daya explains that someone has to dig up the roots of the puppet tree and destroy them. Only then can everyone be saved. However, since they're all trapped, there's no one to do it. She begins to cry, saying there's no hope because they're all doomed. However, Lin breaks free easily and says that if that's the problem, then he'll dig up the roots himself. The other two are shocked, asking how he got free. He starts laughing and says, to put it simply, because his body is so strong, the roots that tried to strangle him ended up destroying themselves. He thinks to himself that it was actually due to the volcano's influence that his body became as tough as his dragons. But he can't reveal the truth, and asks if they understood. The two are stunned, and Daya asks if that means he knows how to use a knight's fighting spirit. Alan is amazed, saying his fighting spirit level is incredibly high. Lin is pleased, thinking that not only did they buy it, they even helped come up with such a solid explanation. That's just what he'd expect from his best friends. He gets ready and says they can't waste any more time. It's time to hunt. Somewhere else, Saren keeps bothering his president, questioning why he's acting that way when he said they'd duel on the 5th floor. The girl with them yells for him to stop this nonsense and asks if he doesn't know that attacking a non-random target results in a 1,000-point deduction. She asks if he wants the president to be eliminated. Saren yells back that he knows, but he just can't understand why his leader wants to meet with the protagonist. Every time Lin is mentioned, he questions the president, asking what exactly Lin did to deserve so much attention. Augustin looks at him, walks over, and shows him a card. But the girl quickly interrupts, asking how the president could let Saren see his ID card, pointing out that the real target is the protagonist. So what will happen if Saren does something foolish again to prevent that duel? Augustine replies that it won't matter. Saren will never be able to face Lin on equal footing. Saren is left in shock by his president's words. He stands there, trembling with rage, wondering if he truly will never be able to defeat the protagonist, and why his president would say something like that. He wonders if it's because Lin went into the volcano and he didn't. He recalls the president's ID card and thinks even the Tower of Judgment sees the protagonist as a more suitable rival for Augustin. This fills him with fury. He jumps and charges ahead alone, thinking that they should all just watch, because the one unfit to be the president's rival is Lin. Meanwhile, around the puppet tree, the protagonist has already created a crater but hasn't found the roots. He keeps digging, even with his hands all injured, thinking how deep they must be. Not only are they incredibly deep, but the soil is extremely hard. He thinks those roots know exactly how to hide. He keeps digging, thinking it should be soil, but it's as hard as metal. Even with a body as tough as his dragon's, he'll still get hurt if he keeps digging non-stop. However, Dia had said the roots are about 2 meters below the surface, so he should find them soon. Alan thinks the protagonist is pushing himself too far. Dia agrees, saying that even if that magical beast could drop an ID card, Lin could have abandoned them long ago. She points out that he can't use magic as it could agitate the puppet tree, and he doesn't even have tools to dig. Suddenly, Alan spots something and shouts to the protagonist that there's something moving to his right. Lin stands up, extremely annoyed, saying he'd been wondering why he couldn't find it. And now, it's clear. It keeps moving. He punches toward the root, telling it to stop, but it keeps crawling and he keeps striking. Suddenly, his body begins to be enveloped by a light armor, and he hears the spirit of wind, who wanders between sky and earth. Hear my prayer and clothe our warrior in battle gear. Water also begins to gather around him, and he hears, "Oh, glowing water, our compassion, nourish the earth." Lin looks at the two and scolds them, asking how they're casting magic. Dia, even while in pain and with a trembling voice, says they're fine. They can still endure that level of vine pressure. Alan agrees, saying they're about to repay the help because how could they let him do all the work alone? Lin looks at his companions and thinks that, despite having defeated countless beasts together, only at that moment did he truly realize that they are a real team. One of the water blasts hits the root, flinging it into the air. The protagonist takes advantage of the moment and uses his fire blade to slice it in half. The tower system appears, congratulating him, Dia, and Alan for earning their identification cards. Lin is happy and asks if that obedient thing really had an ID. Was it the one that appeared? The other two are finally released, and Alan says he did an excellent job and managed to get his ID card. Dia adds that he should keep the certification because he deserves it. The protagonist turns to them and says it's not quite like that because it's not just his ID card. He shows that he has 3 of them. The two get extremely excited and ask if a magical beast can really drop that many cards. The Magic Tower announces that, in light of the battle against the puppet tree, key information and clues were provided. Dia is recognized as the Guardian, having shown strong perception and spotted the root's movement. Alan is recognized as the Observer. Rushing to the front line and landing the final blow, Lin is recognized as the Interceptor. Each team member can receive 1 ID card. The protagonist says it's because he wasn't the only one recognized. This was thanks to teamwork. Alan starts crying, saying that even he was acknowledged. He hugs the protagonist, saying it's all thanks to him. Dia is also overjoyed, saying that if it weren't for Lin, they wouldn't have gotten this far. They agree it's now time to hurry, train, and prove they truly deserve their ID cards. Alan is happy, saying Dia gave him an incredibly good elixir because he's fully recovered. Even his fruit was restored. He asks if she wants to become his older sister. She's confused, asking why he loves having older siblings so much. While the two are talking, the protagonist looks at his ID card and sees that his opponent is Augustin. Dia says her opponent is the vice president, Grenna, and Alan says his is Saren. But once he realizes what he just said, he freezes in shock, remembering how strong his opponent is. He runs over to the protagonist and clings to him, begging him to save his life. Lin tells him to use the determination and mindset he had when they were defeating the puppet tree because he is the team's observer. Suddenly, some attacks come toward them and the protagonist notices. He shouts that a sneak attack is incoming, uses his shield to protect them, and warns his companions to be careful. He keeps focusing on building a counterattack but realizes that the magic is extremely powerful and his shield can't hold it. Alan grows worried and asks why the protagonist helped block the attack, saying he doesn't feel worthy of being saved by his captain. Lin, even while injured, says there's a reason Alan calls him older brother. Dia tells everyone to stay alert. Saren appears, laughing, consumed by hatred. He starts shouting, asking if his president is watching, demanding he look at the protagonist and questioning if he still thinks Saren isn't worthy of facing Lin since he can't even withstand one of Saren's attacks. Daya asks why he always resorts to sneak attacks. Alan agrees and says that, besides, the opponent Saren should be after is him, not Lin. Alan keeps questioning if Saren isn't afraid of being eliminated for randomly attacking an opponent. Saren starts laughing and asks what he's talking about. He never attacked the protagonist. His target has always been Alan. He prepares another attack saying he never focused his strikes on Lin. It was the protagonist who helped Alan block it. He says Alan had already entered the floor before, so he should know. The tower uses the block target to determine the opponent, and since he stepped away and ran, he wouldn't be able to do anything now. He launches his attack, and Alan says winning without fighting fairly will only make more people despise him, and someone so shameful doesn't deserve to be here. Alan steps in front of the attack and says that once he's eliminated, Saren won't be able to use any more dirty tricks to hit the protagonist. A large explosion happens and blood starts dripping onto the floor. Lin stepped in to protect him, and Daya, seeing that her captain was doing that with his own body, created a shield in front of him to help block the attack. The protagonist gets angry with his companion and tells him to start defending himself and stop saying he'll be eliminated all the time. He emphasizes that if Saren can attack them by exploiting weaknesses, they can do the same, pointing out that their opponent is strong, but not stronger than the three of them together. Alan gets emotional seeing that his team is truly willing to do anything to protect him. Saren starts laughing and questions whether they really think he isn't stronger than the three of them together. He tells the protagonist that he won't deny they might be able to defeat him if they combine their strength. However, Lin and Daya can't attack him. He starts summoning his spirits and gets ready to strike, saying he'd like to see how the protagonist will defend against this attack. Daya begins casting her magic, saying the tower will protect them and the wind will lend them its agility. Lin prepares to defend them from all the blows and asks the observer to tell him which one is the real body. Alan has a moment of realization and sees he needs to act. He begins asking the water to convert and follow the flow of magic, revealing the real one. He carefully observes the battlefield and quickly finds the real one, saying that he's right there. As soon as he gets the information on where the real one is, the protagonist dashes like a true flame bolt and charges toward his opponent. Saren only smiles, asking if the protagonist is really going to attack him head-on like that. However, the protagonist doesn't attack him. He grabs him, asking what he just said, questioning if it wasn't the tower that determined the opponent, saying he's always been attacking alone. Saren gets scared and asks what he's trying to do. The two start falling off the cliff and Saren panics. The protagonist asks him if he has time to use the wind wings and uses his firepower to push them even faster downward. The two crash hard into the ground, creating a large crater. The protagonist gets up with a lump on his head, saying that really hurt. However, thanks to his body's resilience, he's fine. His team runs over to him, asking if he's okay, and Dia asks why he always does that kind of dangerous thing. He smiles, saying that at least he's okay, but she asks if he's injured and tells him to drink that recovery elixir to stay standing. He thanks her, saying he's fine. Saren starts to get up with a trembling voice, all battered. He asks if that's why the president said Lin is stronger than him, pointing out that apparently the protagonist is really determined when doing something. He asks again if that's why the president said he's stronger. Lin turns to him, irritated, and with a serious tone asks Saren if he really thinks he's stronger than him, because if he truly thought that all this time, then why did he never dare to fight him directly? Saren is confused by this, but the protagonist keeps explaining, saying that Saren is already a 4th rank mage and his power is greater than the protagonist's. Besides, he knows many more spells, but on the previous floor, he didn't dare rely on his own strength to earn points. And even on the 5th floor, he tried to take advantage of the fact that the protagonist couldn't attack him to try to win. He asks again if Saren really isn't confident he can win in a one-on-one fight without using those little tricks. Saren gets angry and asks what he's talking about, claiming to be extremely confident, and tells the protagonist to stop joking, saying he didn't treat him as an opponent because he just didn't think he was worthy. Lin gets irritated and says the truth is that he's just trembling in fear of losing a direct confrontation. All bruised, Saren is left speechless and begins to remember what he was thinking before. On the previous floor, he started to wonder whether the protagonist could kill more beasts than him. Seeking luck and trying to stay safe, he thought he had to stop him from leveling up. Then, on the 5th floor, while searching for Lin, he also began to question if someone who survived a volcano really couldn't be stronger than him. He thought he couldn't let the president look down on him like that. Coincidentally, he wanted to eliminate that Alan guy, and since that was the case, he would use the protagonist to defeat him. Lin continues insisting that Saren is just afraid of losing, and that's why he never dared to face him head-on. He says he's not even talking about Augustine because who would approve a coward like him and still admit he's strong? Saren remains on his knees, all beat up, and gets angry at that. He says the protagonist has no right to lecture someone just because he won, because that's being a really annoying person. He looks at Alan and asks what he's waiting for, telling him to eliminate him right now. Alan begins casting his magic, and Saren, before being eliminated, asks the protagonist to give him the chance for a real duel next time. Lin is surprised by the request and smiles, saying that outside the tower he'll be waiting for that duel. Saren smiles, pleased with that. Alan attacks to eliminate his opponent. However, his attack is interrupted by an arrow. Saren is surprised to see the light of the blade and, looking up, sees that Grenna is there. He asks what she's doing there. She shouts, saying that the president ordered everyone to stop fighting and gather at the central teleportation matrix. Alan gets alarmed and asks why he should stop fighting, since he was just about to level up. He questions why she gave Saren the right to say that. The protagonist says that even if it's a real gathering, there's no need to stop them from progressing to the next level. Grenna asks if the protagonist truly hasn't noticed and emphasizes that the tower has lost control. She explains that first, the panel started to malfunction. Some people who were killed inside the tower remained there. Their companions began crying, asking why they were still there, since they should have been immediately taken outside upon death. Grenna continues explaining and says that after that, the protective layer started to fail, and even those who were killed by beasts were not transported out of the tower. There were people who died at the hands of others. Saren is confused and asks how that's possible. Lin tries to access the panel and says it definitely looks scrambled. Alan also gets scared, saying he nearly killed someone for real. Grenna tells her companion that he's a wind mage, so he should quickly treat his wounds and follow her so she can inform him of the rest. Meanwhile, the others must immediately gather at the central teleportation panel. As soon as they arrived at the Matrix, they noticed that something was happening there. Upon seeing it, the protagonist remembers that this is the same feeling he had at the beginning. A severely wounded person begins to approach, saying that the president stated that this is what caused the panel to lose control because that is the monster that got stuck in the central teleportation matrix, causing it, the teleportation, to lose its control. Grenna appears beside her master and reports that all the students have been gathered. She emphasizes that there were 22 confirmed deaths, 6 seriously injured, and 3 missing. Additionally, she highlights that they still aren't sure if the students eliminated on the 4th floor of the tower managed to exit safely. Alan begins to panic and asks if the missing people were also killed. Daya also can't believe it, saying that more than 20 elite students who made it to the 5th floor died. Augustine looks at the protagonist and says that compared to the students who died, they were really lucky. Lin gets irritated and asks what he means by that, questioning if he's implying that he should have died in the place of the other students. The president says he's right, emphasizing that apparently he's always been very lucky. But in the end, he's also a student of the Iris Sacred Magic Academy. And so, while they're dealing with that monster, he'd better keep relying on that luck. The monster begins to move aggressively, creating strong gusts of wind around. As soon as the monster appears, everyone is stunned by its size, questioning how it managed to get in through some hidden part of the tower, since there's no record of such a demonic beast in the books. They also worry, since without the protective layer, how are they going to defeat that kind of monster? The monster makes another move, scaring the people who scream that even its tentacles already possess immense power. While some students run, screaming and wanting to leave the tower, Augustine and Lin prepare to strike back. He uses his lightning and charges in. People are impressed by his courage. The protagonist also uses his instant fireball, and the students realize that it's not just the president, but even the one who entered through the back door is confronting that abomination. Alan gets irritated and asks who's the student saying he entered through the back door, because he won't allow anyone to talk like that about his older brother. He emphasizes that if the student is a coward and wants to hide in his shell, then he should just shut up and get out. The student also gets angry and even scared, and with a trembling voice, asks who Alan is talking about, because at no point did he say he would hide. He starts running toward the monster, saying he's going to fight too, because he's not worse than the first-class student. The president and the protagonist remain on the front line, using everything they have to attack, but they realize that the damage dealt to the monster is so small that they soon realize they're about to be attacked. The protagonist thinks that he has a strong body, but Augustine won't endure this blow. The president thinks the same, that he can dodge the hit, but the protagonist can't. Even while hating each other, they were both worried about one another at that exact moment, until several other spells began hitting the tentacles, stopping the monster's attack. Augustine looks down and is impressed to see that all the students are cooperating. They shout to the president that they want to fight too. Lin backs away from the monster and comments that those people always seem arrogant. But the president really is popular. Alan tells the protagonist not to mind how the president acts because he's usually the first to charge straight into danger. Daya smiles and agrees, saying that's exactly why the Academy's students trust him so much. Augustine tells everyone that the tower's protective layer has already stopped functioning. Grenna says the students' safety is also their responsibility, but that they need everyone's help in that moment. Saren, who is also ready to fight, confirms and emphasizes that everyone who entered the tower is part of the Academy's elite, and no one is willing to back down. Augustine begins saying that it's exactly because they are the Academy's elite that he stops talking and starts thinking that maybe it's because of that guy. He remembers that the students were running away until they saw the protagonist charging forward and then decided to change direction, shouting that they wanted to fight too. He also looks at Lin thinking that this really is effective. Taking advantage of everyone's excitement, He raises his hand and shouts for everyone to prepare for the great battle. The students begin to get excited, ready to fight that gigantic monster. The president asks his vice to take command and analyze the monster's attributes, while Saren will lead the formations. The rest must use their spells and protect each other. They need to cast spells and suppress the monster's power. He shouts for the beast capture formation to prepare. A giant magic circle appears beneath the monster, and the president yells that they need to capture it. Magic chains start emerging from the circle, restraining the monster's tentacles. Augustin remains in command and asks all fire mages to prepare to attack. Together with everyone, the protagonist begins casting his magic, creating a strong wave of heat in the area. The president asks the wind mages to also prepare. He gives the order for everyone to attack at once. An extremely powerful attack strikes the monster's head, piercing through it. Daya is happy and asks if it worked. Alan is a bit disappointed and says they didn't even need to analyze anything. However, the monster, which had just taken that heavy blow, begins opening its mouth, creating a deafening noise and breaking all the chains that were holding it. Saren is surprised and comments that the sound is so high-pitched that it might be a spirit spell. The protagonist remains standing and tries to call for his companions, but they're all collapsed with headaches. Looking to the side, he sees that even Saren is completely wounded. Suddenly, he too begins feeling an absurdly strong pain in his head, enough to make his nose bleed. The president tries to heal the others, telling them not to give up yet. He begins blaming himself, saying that everything is due to his negligence. He prepares to attack again and asks everyone still conscious to help attack the monster's mouth. Lin, even in severe pain, begins thinking that all of this is pointless, because even with all the attacks, the monster remains unscathed. It's impossible to win with such inferior power. He starts wondering how to defeat that type of spiritual beast. Reflecting on the word spiritual, he remembers that some time ago the butler told him he had reached the 3rd level and could therefore inherit the dragon's power. After using it, this power can shock lower-ranked beasts, and the greater the level difference, the longer the stun time. He thinks that now he also knows how to cast spiritual spells with their dragon's power. Gathering his strength, he tries to use this power, but the monster roars back, causing even more pain in the fighters who were still standing. Due to the effort he made, Lin begins to suffer even more from the first attack's effects. He kneels, thinking that all of this is useless because the level gap is too great. Suddenly, he begins to feel an enormous energy leaving his body, without him intending to. Yiya's spirit starts forming around him and roars back at the monster. Yiya's presence is so strong that it paralyzes the monster with a single roar. The monster, realizing there's a presence even more terrifying than itself, is frozen in shock. The president takes the opportunity to counterattack with everything he has. The attacks begin hitting the monster, causing it to stop moving. Grenna falls to her knees on the ground, already exhausted, and says that creature has finally stopped. Augustine, who is still standing, asks if his vice commander also felt that. He looks back and sees the people on the ground and starts to wonder what made that demonic beast stop for a second. However, he thinks he might just be starting to see things from thinking too much. A little away from the others, the protagonist speaks very quietly with the butler, asking what that was, and whether Yiya really came out or not, because he doesn't know if that dragon can come out on its own. The system replies that dragon wisdom is a skill acquired by Yaya in the training field, using only her own abilities. Therefore, the host can also use it as long as the body is capable of withstanding it, but it's best to use it only once a day. Yiya asks why her master is making such a fuss, questioning if he didn't want to use the dragon's power just a while ago. The protagonist starts arguing with her, asking why she didn't say that before. However, she replies that if she had told him and taken him to the training field every day to get those skills, clearly he wouldn't play with her anymore. Alan gets up and tells Augustine that they owe him one for managing to stop that demonic beast. He emphasizes that he was able to discover its weaknesses and attributes, and says that it is a 6th rank demonic blessing with dark attributes, the Nightmare Troll. Grenna begins to ask how a nightmare troll could be so big and says that besides that, it should have scales. Alan, exhausted and trembling, says he's not so sure, but his magic says it's a nightmare troll. If they don't use light attribute attacks, it will be difficult to deal with it. The president thinks that now everything makes sense, and that's why the attacks weren't working on that thing. That also explains why the light attacks caused a bit more damage. However, they only have 2 light mages, and that's not good at all. Alan continues speaking and says that on top of all that, compared to normal nightmare beasts, if that monster takes someone into the nightmare, suddenly an attack hits the president from behind. Saren had betrayed him. He turns around asking what's going on, and Saren just keeps laughing with dark eyes and a strange aura coming from his body. He starts laughing, saying that he finally managed to defeat the president and emphasizes that now he is the strongest student at the Sacred Academy. Grenna quickly uses the light bind to restrain him. She turns to speak to Alan that Saren is, however, he starts laughing too. And as he lifts his head, his eyes are also black and a strange aura comes from his body. He starts laughing nonstop, saying that he can finally leave the tower. The other students begin fighting each other, taken over by the monster's nightmare, saying that now they can achieve victory. Grenna begins to worry, saying it's not just two, but everyone who is starting to be affected, and questions if this is what Alan was talking about. The protagonist begins defending himself and his companion. He asks her if she knows how to recover the other's consciousness, but she apologizes, saying she also doesn't know what to do. The monster starts rising again and creates a strong, dark aura. All the students who had been affected by the nightmare begin to be drawn to it. Alan starts running toward the monster, telling the protagonist and Daya to follow him so they can leave the tower together. Lin tries to stop him, telling him to stop, but he keeps running. The protagonist reacts quickly, pushes him down, and holds him to the ground, shouting that he hasn't left the tower yet. However, when he looks ahead, he sees that all the other people are walking toward the monster. Augustine, even injured, starts shouting for everyone to stop and not go toward that thing. Grenna starts to worry about him, telling him not to shout like that because his bleeding hasn't stopped, and besides that, he's the only hope they have to fight. Augustine is shocked by what he sees. The monster's tentacles begin hitting the students' heads, and he says that the nightmare is sucking everyone's life force. Without thinking twice and even injured, he charges forward with everything he's got, leaving his companion behind. Confident, he shouts that they should leave the Sacred Academy's future to the best mage in the academy. He begins gathering an incredible amount of energy in his hand and charges to attack the monster, shouting that it must return all the students immediately. Grenna is happy and tears start to stream from her eyes, seeing that her president managed to level up. Even the protagonist is moved by that, saying that unexpectedly he can no longer hate that person. Augustine keeps looking at the monster after delivering his attack and wonders if this time it was effective. However, he realizes that the monster withstood all the attacks without suffering a single scratch and destroyed the binding magic with just one strike, leaving only 10 people left to attack. This makes him doubt whether an attack at his current level will be effective or not. Suddenly, another tentacle shoots out from the monster and strikes his head as well. He begins to lose his energy, and the other students start attacking, trying to help their president. The launched attacks hit the tentacles, but nothing happens. The monster simply unleashes another attack, creating immense pressure and hitting the remaining standing mages. Lin becomes worried, saying that this damn trauma, if things continue like this, everyone will be defeated. He asks the butler if he can keep using Dragon Wisdom. The system appears, asking the protagonist to stay calm, as this skill can't be used excessively. The first use is very defensive, but the more it's used, the more side effects it causes, even resulting in the user's explosion. Lin doesn't care anymore and simply uses Dragon Wisdom, bringing Yiya's spirit back to the battlefield. The monster stares at it, and the protagonist feels the side effects all over his body. An immense pain takes over him, but he concentrates and, determined, begins using Dragon Claws and charges forward with everything he has. Grenna tries to stop him, saying it's useless since only attribute-based attacks work. However, she is astonished, as with just one attack, the protagonist manages to cut off the monster's tentacle. Lin thinks this was already expected, since not only Dragon Wisdom, but all Dragon-type attacks are effective, and Dragon Wisdom is the best skill to break through that monster's defense. However, he doesn't know how much his body will endure. The monster becomes even angrier after having its tentacles cut and attacks the protagonist with all its might. He notices the incoming attack and thinks this is really bad, as just when he activated the dragon's power, he's going to be hit by that attack. However, he hears someone saying, "You really are lucky." Augustine manages to step in and create a barrier to protect them. Grenna starts healing Lin, who shouts for her to stop that and help the president first. However, she yells at him to shut up and stay quiet because the president ordered her to heal him first. The protagonist is confused, and the president says he really figured it out. He emphasizes that he doesn't exactly know why, but among everyone there, the only person who was effective against the monster was Lin. And with a smile on his face, he says, maybe being lucky is also important in that kind of situation. He continues looking at the protagonist and says he really doesn't have much optimism about his future. However, even so, having a bit of self-esteem is still good. He emphasizes that Lin should use all the luck he has to survive and asks him to give some of that luck to the others too. Suddenly, the monster manages to land a hit on Augustine and Grenna. With that, the protagonist lets his guard down, as he didn't expect the two of them to be hit. Daya uses the last of her strength and asks her captain to be more careful. She manages to pull him out of the path of the attack, but she is also hit by the monster. Seeing this, the protagonist starts screaming, as everyone was being attacked and defeated by the monster. Realizing that there's no way out, he thinks he can't do anything else and there's no way to survive and save everyone. He needs Yiya's power. However, he thinks about how his clan was exiled by the Empire because his father released a dragon. So, if they find out he is connected to dragons, his clan's reputation will only get worse. This makes him wonder if he should use his last resort. However, faced with everything, seeing his companion suffering and being killed, he thinks he can't hesitate. Even if they find out, his companion still saved him, and he has to take responsibility and save everyone. He shouts, summoning Yiya, who immediately appears before him. He climbs onto her back and she asks if that is the opponent he's facing. The protagonist replies that yes, and begs her to help him defeat it. Without hesitation, she begins to charge forward, saying they'll take it down. Outside the tower, His Majesty was still watching, and one of the people approaches him, frightened, apologizing for the delay. The king says that too much time has passed and questions why no student has yet been ejected from the tower and what the Sacred Academy is doing. The man responds that his colleague just checked the system, and the tower's teleportation has stopped working. He emphasizes that it's impossible to enter or exit, and beyond that, the laws of the tower are extremely chaotic. They may be facing serious problems inside. The king becomes worried and asks what they can do about it. The man, concerned, says they're trying to interact with the tower from the outside, but so far they've had no success. He adds that they also used magic to try to summon the headmaster, but received no response. The Sacred Academy is the best school in the Empire, and this is how they solve problems? He questions. The king becomes extremely irritated, asking if that's really the only way. All the best students of the academy are inside the tower and need help, and all you do is wait? He yells again, demanding to know what they're doing to solve the problem. Vivian also enters the room, shouting for Gwen to try contacting the headmaster immediately. One of the guards asks her to mind her manners. She becomes angry, thinking how they can worry about formalities in a situation like this. She asks the king to allow her to go in first, since one of her colleagues detected the aura of a dragon coming from the tower. Both the king and Gwen are shocked by this. The king asks if humans hadn't already sealed all the dragons in the Eastern Rift Valley. That past catastrophe cannot happen again, so he questions where that dragon came from. Inside, the protagonist is still flying beside the monster. He says this is great because as soon as he released Yiya, the monster stopped focusing on the students and is only targeting them now. While flying, Yiya tells him there are other humans lying nearby. Lin asks where, and as soon as he looks, he realizes the people lying there are wearing academy uniforms. He remembers the students who were beginning to change their opinion of him. All of them were defeated. The protagonist becomes extremely angry and says that the students who were eliminated on the 4th floor also couldn't escape. He says it's time to launch a counterattack and tells his dragon to use Dragon Force. Yiya lets out a powerful roar, making the monster tremble all over. They split up, and the protagonist tells her to attack from the left while he goes all in from the right, since they first need to eliminate all those annoying tentacles. With fast and precise attacks, they manage to cut off all the monster's tentacles and it starts trying to flee. Lin sees this and gets angry, saying now it wants to run away after causing so much trouble. The monster continues trying to escape, and the butler warns that the energy fluctuation from the clan, an extremely powerful aura begins forming around the monster. The system keeps warning that a powerful dragon aura has been detected, and that they need to evacuate immediately. Lin becomes confused, asking how a dragon aura is being detected, since that monster was a nightmare troll. How can it have dragon energy? Yiya begins to get angry and says that's why she was feeling something strange while fighting. That monster has black scales, dragon scales. The protagonist is even more confused, as Grenna said, nightmares don't have scales. Yiya begins to get furious with the whole situation and says that bastard dared to attack her, a member of the dragon clan. The monster attacks with everything it has, and she prepares to retaliate. The protagonist tells her to jump immediately and dodge the attack, but she questions if he really wants her to flee. She counterattacks with her powerful flames, blocking the attack, leaving the protagonist impressed with everything. However, that being gathers even more strength and attacks again, causing immense pressure. This time, its attack hits Yiya directly, causing an explosion in the area. Wounded, she says that creature, which is neither dragon nor beast, still masters the magic of the dragon clan. Lin realizes his companion is seriously injured and won't withstand another attack of that magnitude. He tells her she doesn't need to face it head-on, using magic, and emphasizes that from now on, she must follow his orders. However, Yiya asks if the protagonist is saying her magic is weaker than that freak's. The monster attacks once more, and Lin begs her to listen and dodge because they'll attack from above. She decides to listen and dodges, and he thanks her for it. The monster continues attacking multiple times, and he asks Yiya to keep dodging everything and find the right distance. And once she finds it, she should leap onto the monster's head, attacking the blind spot. They keep advancing until she gets close enough and attacks the monster. It tries to retaliate, but it's too late. She lands a blow to its forehead. After that, several more attacks continue in sequence. Suddenly, the monster attacks with several smaller tentacles, hitting Yiya. She realizes that her magical power is being drained. The protagonist is shocked that the monster can even absorb a dragon's energy, and without thinking twice, he charges forward, cutting its links to her. However, he gets hit. Yiya becomes worried. Tears start falling from her eyes, as her only friend is being hurt right in front of her. The protagonist begins to fall while coughing up blood, and she can't bear to watch it anymore. Overwhelmed by hatred and rage toward that beast, she starts gathering an immense amount of fire. Even the monster starts to show surprise at the amount of magic being accumulated by the dragon. The protagonist keeps falling, asking what she's doing. However, the attack goes straight for the head of the demonic beast, engulfing its entire body in flames. The butler appears saying, "It's the fire dragon's breath!" Yiya learned the dragon breath skill during battle. Growth value plus 100. Still consumed by fury, she continues attacking non-stop, screaming that the monster is going straight to hell. The system keeps notifying. The dragon Yia has defeated the evolved 6th ranking magical beast, Nightmare Trauma, growth value plus 500. The fire dragon's growth value has reached its limit, promoted to rank 4 fire dragon. Yia keeps tearing the monster apart as if she can't control herself from so much rage. The system reports current classification rank 4. Skills: Crushing Stone Bite, Dragon Breath, Dragon Force, Fire Immunity, Medium, Physical Immunity, Fire Projectile Magic, Shield, Medium, Recovery. Growth value: 1/1000th, Health Points, 90/100ths. Lin is stunned by her current strength, and as soon as she defeats that monster, she approaches the protagonist. Seeing that he's okay, she starts bragging, laughing, saying she's super strong. Lin starts smiling and petting her, saying that she really is very strong and that his Yia is the strongest in the whole world. He thinks that although her appearance and strength have changed a lot, deep down she's still the same little girl as always. The butler appears, saying that since the ranch owner did almost nothing to help defeat the nightmare troll, he will be rewarded with 5 experience points. He cries, thinking he was almost useless. With that, his current experience points are Level 3, 203/200ths. Promotion to 4th ranking mage available. He lies down, saying that this time he's extremely reluctant to level up. Suddenly he hears, "Problem detected with the test. All students will be teleported out of the tower in 3 minutes." Lin says he already expected that. The students could only leave after the nightmare troll was defeated. He starts asking if the students are still okay. Suddenly the two hear a faint moan and go on alert. He quickly gets up, asking if that monster isn't dead yet. However, as he gets closer, he realizes that a sphere is near him. He looks closely and says it looks like there's a little dragon inside. Yia asks if there's really another of her kind. Some strings were piercing the little dragon's body, who cried in pain while trapped inside that sphere. Lin was surprised to notice something and asked if that wasn't the same wave of energy released by the nightmare demon before it launched its attacks. And apparently, all those voices they heard before the attacks were actually the cries of the baby dragon, and not the wrath of the nightmare demon. The protagonist also realized that the monster was trying to recover its energy by stealing the strength of the little dragon. Yaya, seeing one of her kin suffering, grew furious and said she couldn't take it anymore. With a swift strike, she shattered the capsule, cursing the damned nightmare demon. After pulling the little dragon out of there, she kept spewing fire at the remaining fragments, demanding how that inferior being dared torment the Dragon Clan in such a way, and declared that for this he would be burned until nothing remained. Lin looked at the scene and said that the nightmare demon was indeed the cause of it all, but he wanted to know who the real mastermind behind everything was. He began recalling what he had seen at the school and wondered whether the demonic beast could really control a child of the Dragon Clan on its own, or if this was another experiment conducted by humans with dragons. While thinking about this, another thought struck him and he grew alarmed, beginning to wonder if that little child was the offspring of that skeletal dragon. Considering this hypothesis, he also thought that perhaps the nightmare demon was the result of an experiment carried out in the laboratory. However, Lin felt confused, questioning whether his father and Oliver would truly be the kind of people who would allow such cruelty to happen to a dragon hatchling. While reflecting on all of this, he slowly began to close his eyes and asked what was happening to him, since his body was starting to feel sore and exhausted. He also realized he was beginning to be teleported out of the tower. Before being teleported, he said there was no reason to overthink, and that he would investigate as soon as he left the tower. The protagonist also told Yia to take the little dragon back to the farm, since later he would bring some recovery potions to heal its wounds. Outside the tower, the people working hard to pull the students out shouted in excitement that it was working, since the tower's teleportation devices had indeed started functioning again. With that, the participants trapped inside would soon be transported outside. Professor Yisha stepped forward and told everyone to move as fast as possible to check whether the students were safe. Gwyn also assisted her, asking for the medical teams to be ready immediately. But both of them were completely shocked the moment the students were teleported out. Almost all of them collapsed on the ground, unable to move. She noticed that the protagonist was still conscious and ran to him with tears in her eyes, asking what had happened inside the tower and why they were so severely injured. Still dazed and utterly exhausted after his battle, Lin heard the professor's voice and realized he was outside, asking if everyone had made it out safely. After that, he completely lost his strength and collapsed unconscious. The medical team began shouting that they had to approach immediately to provide first aid. That day, the king was extremely furious and demanded that the academy conduct a thorough investigation into the incident. The academy's professors were equally shocked and enraged, swearing to uncover the culprit behind it all. To save as many lives as possible, the king ordered the finest potions and support mages from the royal palace to treat the students. Fortunately, Daya, Alan, Saber, and Augustine survived the attack, but the students who had turned into zombies or sustained severe injuries did not make it. Out of 100 students, only 28 survived. Augustine, who had been the academy's main focus, spoke. The professor went to him once more and questioned if that was really what he meant. Augustine cut her off, irritated with the situation, and asked how many more times she would repeat the same question until she was satisfied. emphasizing that the person who saved everyone wasn't him but Lin. Thanks to the protagonist's power, they managed to escape that place alive. Lin, who was in the same room looking out the window, was a little surprised by the situation. His companions also appeared there. Alan told his boss that everyone had already gathered downstairs, and Daya smiled, saying he didn't need to rush since he was everyone's hero now, so surely they would wait as long as needed for him. Lin grew a little embarrassed and asked her not to tease him like that. Because of that incident, he gained the approval of all the academy's teachers and students, becoming the newest rising talent of the institution, rivaling even Augustin. However, the protagonist wasn't happy at all about receiving such an honor. Upon arriving at the cemetery, where all the students were being mourned, the teachers asked for a moment of silence for everyone who had lost their lives in that terrible incident, so that the god of magic would bless their souls. Lin began to wonder how anyone could feel happy about some kind of honor in such a tragic situation. While he watched people crying and suffering from their losses around him, he looked up into the rainy night and, in his thoughts, begged his father to tell him whether that tragedy had anything to do with him. The next day inside the library laboratory, Lin was once again staring at the skeleton of the dragon that kept crying out for its child. He continued thinking that the little sleeping dragon must, without a doubt, be the child that the skeletal dragon was searching for. With this in mind, he asked the butler to teleport the sleeping little dragon to him, and soon the dragon began to appear. Lin picked up the little dragon and showed it to the skeletal dragon, asking if that was the child it was looking for. The baby dragon began to wake up, and as soon as it saw the skeleton in front of it, became extremely frightened and jumped onto the protagonist's head, clinging to him in fear. Lin told the little dragon to be careful with its claws. Suddenly, the skeleton began to calm down and its body returned to normal. It told the little child not to be afraid. Lin was also surprised to see the skeleton recovering. The great dragon continued calling its child, asking it not to be afraid because its mother was right there. The protagonist thought that this was wonderful because now she could speak normally, and with that, maybe he could ask her what had happened to his father. Smiling, he thought that what mattered most at that moment was not that. He placed the little one on the ground and said that this was its mother. The baby dragon began to walk until it reached its mother. The two looked at each other for a moment, and with tears in its eyes, the hatchling began to cry and call for its mother, who also started crying, saying that she had finally found her child. The mother said that he was alive, healthy, and energetic, and because of that, she was very happy. Just knowing her son was safe already brought her comfort. The dragon mother looked at the protagonist and said, "Thank you, Zoe Lanster. You fulfilled your promise. You truly rescued my son." Upon hearing his father's name, Lin was shocked and asked the dragon mother if she was really saying that his father had agreed to help save her son. The dragon mother was also surprised to hear the protagonist say the word father because that meant Zoe also had children of his own. The protagonist said yes and introduced himself, saying his name was Lin Lanster. The dragon mother asked if he was serious, questioning if his name really was Lin. She explained that her physical body had been completely destroyed, so she could only sense that world through her magic, and the aura the protagonist emitted was exactly the same as his father's. She asked if Zoe was still using dragons to conduct experiments. Once again, Lin was shocked to realize that his father was, in fact, involved in the experiments. He lowered his head and said he didn't know what his father was doing now, since he didn't even know where he was. However, everyone kept saying that he had betrayed the humans, but saved the remaining dragons at the very last moment when humanity was on the verge of triumph. He emphasized that all this time he thought he understood his father very well. However, now he was becoming increasingly confused about what kind of person his father really was. The dragon mother said she couldn't say what kind of person his father was, but she knew he was different from the other humans who had conducted experiments on her kin. She also stressed that she already knew the protagonist was curious to learn what had happened in that laboratory that year, but unfortunately, she didn't have much time left. She held her child and said that she faithfully believed he was a person worthy of the dragon's trust, just as his father had been. With that, she entrusted her child to him, saying she would place her son in the hands of Zoe's son. The mother began to fade away and cried out to the protagonist that when he met his father, he needed to tell him that the Eastern Rift was not the end of the world, because the answers he sought were in the new world, beyond the rift. Lin was completely confused and asked what answers she meant, what new world she was talking about, and begged her to tell him a little more about what exactly it was. However, she vanished, and with her last words, she asked that her son continue to live and be happy. The system appeared, announcing that the problem binding the sleeping dragon's heart had been unchained. Congratulations to the farm owner for completing the mission, The Last Wish of the Sleeping Dragon. You have been rewarded with 2 fragments of the water dragon egg. Collection progress, 5 out of 10, 50 magic experience points. Upon seeing this message, the protagonist began to realize that now he understood, for the chains referred to the mother dragon's attachment to her child that bound her heart, and not the physical chains that imprisoned her there. USO stretched out his hands, trying to reach his mother while crying as he watched her depart. The protagonist kept thinking that this mother had remained as a skeleton all those years only to ensure that her child was safe and happy. That made him wonder if dragons were truly such sentimental beings. The hatchling kept crying as if it had lost part of its heart, and the protagonist, watching the entire scene, thought that they were indeed very different from what people believed them to be. The butler kept notifying and congratulating the farm owner for obtaining a new dragon, the sleeping dragon, USO. Its current level was 0, growth level 0 out of 10, health level 60 out of 100. Note, due to the completion of the mission Sleeping Dragon, the magic tome obtained in the laboratory of experiments was undergoing some changes. Lin, a bit confused, wondered if the magic tome was the book he had found on the experiment table the first time he had been there. However, all he remembered was that on the first page, there had been a conversation between his father and Oliver, and the rest was blank. Yet, the book appeared before him, radiating a different energy than before, and he was surprised to see that the pages that had once been empty were now filled with words. Seeing the poor little one suffering, the protagonist asked the butler to send him back to the farm, so that Yiya could take care of the small dragon. Then, immediately, he began studying the magic tome inside the laboratory. On one of the pages was written, "Experiment topic, Dragon Blood Potion, using a dragon's blood to make a potion that can strengthen humans. We hope that this potion will allow humans to acquire the same strength as dragons, to defeat powerful dragon." Seeing this, the protagonist thought that what his father and the others were doing wasn't using dragons to strengthen demonic beasts. On another page of the book was written, "Oliver, I have been worried about the relationship between the Dragon Clan and humans lately. Perhaps our judgment has been clouded by what lies before us. We must not treat these lives with such cruelty. I sincerely hope you come to your senses and put an end to these horrible and forbidden experiments before we commit even greater sins." Signed, Zoe. Lin was glad because that message had been left by his father. He closed the book and began to think about what was happening there, the forbidden experiments, and what really happened back then that made his father change his mind during the experiments. He also began to wonder if Uncle Oliver had also changed his mind, questioning whether he had given up on the experiments or chosen to follow the radical path. For example, using dragons to alter the physique of the demonic beast. When he closed the book, a small vial on the table shook and the butler gave him a hint, saying, "A hidden passage mechanism has been detected. Removing the ink from the table will activate the mechanism and open a passage." Curious, and without a second thought, he wiped away the ink beneath the table, asking if there really was a hidden passage there. The table rose and a passage appeared underneath, which surprised him. Lin began to walk through the new place, wondering where that path would take him. From the dust accumulated on the lamps, he realized that this dark and hidden passage hadn't been used in a long time, much like the experiment laboratory. Suddenly, he came across a dead end and grew confused, since he hadn't walked that far, and yet the place already came to an end. He stepped closer and placed his hand on the stone, saying that apparently the passage had been sealed by someone stronger. However, as soon as he touched the stone, a glow began to appear, and he realized that it was another magic circle. He wondered if it was another one of his father's teleportation devices, and upon passing through it, he was surprised, for he hadn't thought there would be an underground channel on the other side. Suddenly, he heard a voice shouting that there was a magical fluctuation there, so there must be an intruder. People shouted to catch him immediately. A monster began coming towards the protagonist, which startled him. However, as soon as the monster and the two people appeared there, no one was present anymore, leaving them confused. Lin quickly returned through the magic teleport and, hidden on the other side, began to think that someone was using the underground routes to carry out illegal business. On the other side, the two people began arguing with each other. One of them said that no one had been there, but his companion punched him in the head, saying that even if someone had been there, the shout probably scared the person away. He further asked when his companion would ever change that horrible temper. The protagonist continued analyzing the situation from the other side of the teleport. He thought that Scavenger from before seemed to have black scales on his back similar to those of the Nightmare Demon, which made him wonder if the monster that attacked the Tower of Judgment had something to do with those people. He began climbing the stairs again, thinking that the situation was still inconsistent, and that he couldn't continue the investigation without proper planning. And while walking, he remembered that there had been a well leading to the surface along the path. Walking a bit further, he found the ladder again and began climbing it, thinking he would just take a look to see what was above the channel. As soon as he reached the surface, he put one hand out and slowly raised his head, checking if anyone was around. Seeing that apparently no one was there, he began to climb out of the well, finding it extremely strange that the exit led to a warehouse. Suddenly, someone appeared at the door, saw the protagonist, and began shouting that there was a thief inside and that the others needed to come immediately to catch him. Startled by the situation, he fell out of the well, and when he tried to go back, he saw that there were many guards. When he jumped to re-enter the well, the passage was blocked by a magic seal. Lucas appeared in front of his guards, shouting and demanding to know who dared invade and cause trouble in the Mason Chamber of Commerce. The two of them stared at each other for a moment, and upon realizing who the person was, the protagonist pointed at him, shouting that this was the evil merchant called Lucas, who wanted to sell Nike for profit. The protagonist was a little surprised. realizing that the Mason Chamber of Commerce was located above that dry well. Lucas was also extremely shocked, saying that the protagonist was that stinking, talented brat who had turned against them after accepting the gift they had given him. Lin grew irritated and said that Lucas had better pay more attention and be careful with his words. Suddenly, Vivian appeared at the door, surprised to see the protagonist, and asked what he was doing there, and if by chance he was the thief everyone was shouting about. Lucas kept shouting and pointing his finger, saying that was exactly the case, and stressed that Lin had suddenly appeared inside the warehouse. So he was sure the protagonist was hiding something. Lin recalled when he had entered the portal to save her, and at that moment, it had said that Vivian Mason logged in and was waiting for the second player. He put two and two together and understood the situation, since the Mason, in her name, referred to the Mason Chamber of Commerce. Vivian stepped in front of the protagonist and said that was impossible because he wasn't a bad person. Lucas kept insisting, asking her not to be deceived by his appearance, and questioned if she had any idea how many secrets were inside that warehouse, saying that if they let him out now, one day he could. However, Vivian interrupted him and, firm in her decision, told him to step aside because she would take the protagonist to see her older sister. A short while later, already inside the Mason Chamber of Commerce, the older sister asked Vivian if she hadn't gone there to get medicinal herbs for practice, and therefore shouldn't waste time and just take them. Vivian tried to interfere in the conversation about the protagonist, but her sister didn't allow it and told her to hurry up and leave. Inside a room, Lin was sitting across from Vivian's older sister, who was currently the president of the Mason Chamber of Commerce, named Alyssa Mason. She addressed the protagonist and said she would be very honest with him, asking how he had appeared beneath that dry well into which none of them could enter. Lin was confused and said that the well was inside their warehouse, so how was it possible that none of them could enter, and questioned whether it wasn't she who had cast the sealing spell to prevent him from leaving. She emphasized that people could only enter and exit that well through the dark passage below, therefore they could not enter from above. The protagonist asked if she really thought he was going to believe what she was saying and questioned whether the dark passage hadn't been created by the Chamber of Commerce to conduct shady business. The president asked if it was just her imagination, or if he had been hostile toward the Chamber of Commerce from the very beginning, stressing that perhaps what Lucas had done the other day had left him with a terrible impression, but that regarding that incident, they also had their complaints. She stated she already knew it was immoral for humans to trade elves for their own pleasure, and that was why they had always refused to engage in that kind of business. However, Lucas had grown up in the Chamber of Commerce and had strong concerns about the survival and success of the institution. He had only captured the elves in secret so that everyone in the trade could live better lives. Lin remained irritated and asked if she really believed that because Lucas's expression did not hide his greed, making it clear that he wanted something beyond just a better life. Moreover, the Chamber of Commerce was the largest in the entire kingdom, so why did they need to trade elves in order to survive? Alyssa began to explain, saying that this took them back to the secret passage of the well. She said that not only was it not a path for conducting business, but in fact, it was the very culprit that kept the Chamber of Commerce hostage. She stated that if he truly was a friend of her younger sister, then he should have heard from her what happened years ago. She began to tell that at that time only one child returned, and people started questioning how the rescue guards ended up bringing back only a single child when they had left with such a large group. They had heard that the group encountered a level 8 demonic beast, and the guards weren't even able to break through its immunity shield. When the rescue army arrived, that little girl was the only survivor, hidden beneath a pile of corpses. The demonic beast that wiped out the caravan had been modified by a powerful group seeking to punish and retaliate against her father after he refused to cooperate, so to protect her younger sister and ensure the safety of everyone in the Chamber of Commerce, and as the successor of her father's business, she had no choice but to cooperate with the killer of her own father. She emphasized that they had to supply these people with special medicinal herbs through the secret underground tunnel that had been built. And in recent years, that powerful group had taken so many resources from the Chamber of Commerce that it left them on the brink of bankruptcy. After hearing the whole story, the protagonist began to think that no one would have imagined that the Mason Chamber of Commerce, which was once the greatest trader in the kingdom, would find itself in such dire straits. Not to mention that this matter was also related to the modified demonic trace, which made him question whether the power controlling the Chamber of Commerce was also the mastermind behind the attack on the Academy. Alyssa called out to him after noticing that he was lost in thought. The protagonist apologized, saying that he had gotten distracted for a moment and stressed that he believed what she had just said. He also said that what he was about to ask might be a delicate matter for the Chamber of Commerce, but earnestly requested that she answer with nothing but the truth. The president kept staring at him and asked what it was that he wanted to know. Lin said it was the list of medicinal herbs, and explained that he wanted to see the list of ingredients that the powerful force behind it all had instructed her to acquire, and that was why he wanted to know everything about it. Alyssa said that was fine and stood up, showing him the way. The protagonist was surprised, since she agreed without hesitation. and Alyssa asked him to follow her. As soon as they arrived in an empty room, he began reading the list of ingredients and saw that it included grass, dragon scales, bay leaves, afternoon pepper fruit. While reading through the list, he thought that these medicinal herbs were almost identical to the ones his father had used in preparing the dragon blood potion experiments. That meant that the same person controlling the Chamber of Commerce was also the one who conducted the dragon blood potion experiments. He began growing irritated with the situation, asking himself if his uncle Oliver was also involved in this. Yet it was frustrating for him not to know exactly what had happened that year. Alyssa just kept looking at him with a slight smile. A little later, she said she could tell how much he cared about this, and asked if he also wanted to know who the mastermind controlling everything from the shadows was. Lin looked at her and said that was exactly what he was after, and asked if she could clarify a little more about them. She smiled and said that she had no problem talking about it, but the next information would come at a price. Lin asked if she wanted him to join forces with her to fight against the powerful force operating behind the scenes, so that their trade could be free again. He crumpled the paper in his hand, telling her not to worry because that same group was most likely the culprit behind the incident at the academy. Alyssa was shocked by this information, unable to believe that this group had dared to interfere even with Iris Academy. She extended her hand to the protagonist, saying that the enemy of your enemy is your friend, and asked him to trust her, because she believed that cooperation between them would be most welcome. She stressed that she had been secretly investigating their entity, and that as soon as there was any news in her investigation, she would notify him immediately. Lin clasped her hand and said he agreed with all of it. He thought that it was no wonder she had allowed him to look at the confidential documents so easily, because she wanted to use that information as a bargaining chip to secure his cooperation from the very beginning. Alyssa began thinking that this was wonderful, because if they had a young and powerful talent like Lin on their side, then perhaps the Chamber of Commerce still had a chance to survive. The president stressed that she wanted him to keep this conversation a secret from Vivian. The protagonist asked why she made such a request, and the president explained that she didn't want her younger sister involved in that matter, because she thought it was best for her protection, that she didn't know anything. Lin smiled and said that Vivian was a great friend, so he would do everything for her well-being. He thought that even a shrewd businesswoman like Alyssa also had someone precious she wanted to protect. After settling things, the protagonist leaves and begins walking through the academy, wondering how many secrets it still has hidden. Upon arriving at his room, Nike is overjoyed, saying that the young master has finally returned, and emphasizes that they had been very worried about him. Little Jack also had tears in his eyes and agreed, saying it was wonderful to see that he was well. The three embraced, and Lin apologized for having worried them. While this reunion was happening, another person arrived. One of the guards greeted him, saying that by the looks of it, he must be student Lin. With an envelope in hand, the guard said it was an invitation from the great Prince Liszt. The guard emphasized that His Highness had ordered him to personally deliver this invitation to the protagonist, as it would be a great honor if he could attend the banquet at the prince's palace in 7 days. The protagonist was surprised to have received an invitation directly from the prince and asked if it was true. The guard, overjoyed, confirmed and stressed that Prince Liszt was the only younger biological brother of the king, and for that reason, His Highness was the person His Majesty trusted the most in the entire kingdom. Lin smiled and said it was truly an honor, asking the guard to tell the great Prince Liszt that he would, without a doubt, attend the banquet in 7 days. The guard began to think that this newly recognized talent was extremely intelligent, for he knew how to seize an opportunity when he saw one. As the royal guard departed, the protagonist wondered if the king's younger brother was indeed deeply trusted by His Majesty. For someone capable of manipulating even the Mason Chamber of Commerce and having control over it, the powerful royal family was definitely one of his suspects. Nevertheless, in any case, it would be best for him to meet this prince. Jack was thrilled by what had just happened, saying that his young master truly was incredible, for he had just received an invitation from the prince himself. On the other hand, Nike looked somewhat suspicious and said that the young master had only recently risen to fame, yet he had already received an invitation from the prince, and because of that, she feared that he might be planning something, as the chief of her life had once said that humans with very high status tended to be more malicious. The protagonist asked her not to say such things, for she was speaking of the prince. Seeing that she was a bit worried, he embraced her, saying that he would return to his room to rest for a while, but that soon he would meet them for lunch. And until then, he would tell them everything about the great monster he had fought. She smiled excitedly, said it was agreed, and asked him to rest well while she prepared lunch since she had learned a new dish that day and he had to try it. He smiled back at her, saying that he was looking forward to tasting that delicious dish. Upon entering his room, he asked the butler to log into the farm, for he was worried about USO and what he might be doing at that moment. As soon as he entered, Ya asked him to hurry up and come closer. The protagonist shouted in concern, asking what had happened, starting to think that something had occurred with the little dragon. But as soon as he approached, he was relieved, for the baby was only sleeping. Ya, all cheerful, asked what her master thought and told him to look at how USO was sleeping so deeply, which meant she had done a great job caring for him. Lin scolded her, asking why she was speaking so loudly and if she wasn't afraid of disturbing the little one's sleep. She told her master not to worry, for USO was in a deep sleep and wouldn't wake up even if she accidentally roared. However, the protagonist kept reprimanding her, asking her to be calmer and to speak more softly. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new content. Thank you.